We our court, so we'll make a start. Just welcome you all back to this, our first formal committee meeting. We did have our away day last week where we set out a number of strategies and way forward in our forward work programme as well, which we'll cover and ratify today. So just a brief overview of today's meeting. Committee are to receive a briefing from the Minister and his department's provisional outturn and an update on the budget reductions. The Minister will then brief the committee on the term ahead, and the committee will consider the Work and Families Bill with a briefing from the Engineers Employers Federation Northern Ireland and a briefing from department officials. Members have apologies from Bronwyn McGahan and Claire Sugden, and other apologies. Okay. Members, Chairperson's business. Members, as I said, at the Strategic Planning Day on the 3rd of September in Loughrea College, the committee considered its priorities and strategic direction for 14-15 Assembly session. Members, at page 5 is the clerk's memos detailing the agreed priorities and actions from the planning day. Members, are you content to formally agree those actions? Phil?
Robin, I attended the launch of a research paper yesterday by NICFA on the living wage.
Yes.
And if possible, it might be useful to get them in to brief us on the report, because it was very informative about the impacts of a living wage from an employer and an employee point of view.
There'll be no speed. I don't think we've much room before
We'll get
Christmas.
them somewhere.
We'll put them down now, because I know it was something that Owen raised in a briefing paper, or something the committee should be keeping an eye on. Members content with the rest of the priorities and actions? Agreed. Members, the British Council has asked that I, as Chair of the Committee, host a dinner in Parliament Buildings for the International UK Skills Seminar on the 22nd of October. Members are content that we host.
Yes,
also advise members, NUSUSI has offered to brief the committee on a recent Pound in Your Pocket report and the recent announcement that the amount available from the Student Hardship Fund has been reduced. Members, are you agreed that we schedule this in the briefing, the forward work programme?
Yes.
Okay, members, draft minutes of the last two meetings is the meetings on the 2nd and the 9th of July. They're at pages 9 and 15 of the pack. Members, do you agree those minutes are accurate?
Agreed.
So I'll say those. Okay, members, matters arising. Members, matters arising are at page 18 and 22 of the packs. Agreed action points from the meetings are noted there. Is there anything arising out of those? Members content to note. Solid.
Just in terms of the STEP success briefing, have we an indicative date as to when we'll be getting a further briefing from successful contractors?
They're all in the forward work
They're in
programme.
the forward work programme. They're scheduled.
October, November.
Yeah.
Late October, November.
Yep, October's the first one.
Okay.
And then we've got the 3 successful contractors, and then the department, and after the 3 of them have briefed us, so they're all there. Okay. Members, correspondence on then as well. There is quite a bit of correspondence in your pack. Just points to note. Page 76 is correspondence from the Committee of the Office of the First and Deputy First Minister regarding the terms of reference for inquiries into building a united community, and seeking a submission from all statutory committees and departments. Members, you content to write to the department and request a copy of its response to the inquiry?
Sure.
Okay.
Great.
Members, then at page 80, correspondence from the Committee of Education regarding the terms of reference for its inquiry into shared or integrated education. Members, do you want to submit anything at this point?
Yep.
No? Not a no for it?
No.
Unless we send them the answers from whatever information we take on the teacher training colleges, is that the only thing that we do?
Okay. Members content to do that. Okay, members, page 133, departmental response regarding the geographical breakdown of deprived areas where people have attained qualifications. I know, Fra, this is something you raised. The response back from the department, I thought, was actually quite poor, because they can't break it down by geographical area according to their statistics. They can break it down into the 5 quintiles of deprivation, but not the specific geographical area.
I thought some of us would have been able to, because quite a lot of statistics that you get and things that's broke down in relation to council areas, and I'm actually quite surprised that you can't do it in these cases. Is there anything we can do about it?
Push them again.
Yep.
Okay.
Ask Owen.
Content. It doesn't, to me it looked as if it was, the detail just wasn't there. Members, page 154, Departmental response to the committee correspondence regarding the impact of the Savings Delivery Plan B7 on Section 75 groups and on its frontline services. Members, did any comment? I know that was something that actually Bronwyn raised. Members, is there anything else on that? Members, content to note?
Yeah.
Members, page 170 is correspondence from Mr Michael Humphreys, the owner of assessment company offering services to students in receipt of Disabled Students Alliance, requesting a meeting with the committee to discuss DSA anti-competitive practices and the lack of quality auditing systems and a general lack of clear legislation relating to the administration and monitoring of the DSA process in Northern Ireland. Members, how do you want to proceed? Will we be content to forward to the department at this stage for comment to see?
Initially, yeah.
As an initial, well, that's the first step. But members content? Okay, members, page 206 of the correspondence is the correspondence from the Commissioner for Older People requesting to brief the committee on the Valuing and Ageing Workforce Report. Members content to schedule this into our forward work programme. Members, page 264 is correspondence from NIPSA and UCU regarding the NWRC. Members, as you remember at our away day, we did formalise a plan as how we would actually take this going forward with informal meetings and then a scheduled 6-monthly review. Happy to include that in those. Okay, thanks, members. Members, page 317 is correspondence from Colleges NI providing information on the college's hardship fund and offering to brief the committee. Members content to schedule that too?
Important, yeah.
Okay. Members, page 359 of the correspondence is a research paper on the hardship fund, considering that the committee's planning day last week, which was something that was tabled for Rome, has to be retabled this week, saying the minister will in front of us. Okay, members, moving on from correspondence, unless there's anything else people want to raise from that.
Nope.
Members, there's 10 invitations in your pack. They're listed at page 321 onwards. If members are, they are all members to invitations to the committee in full, or any of those members. If you do want to attend, members, if you could let the clerk and staff know. Members, draft forward work programme, page 344. The draft forward work programme is there and runs up until the 10th of December 2014. We're still here. Members, anything to?
Just an inquiry on the 12th of November. We're going to my own constituency. We're not holding a formal meeting that day. It's visits.
Yeah, it's 2
A
visits.
study visit to Fordview,
Yeah.
Belmont, Kimber. Yeah.
Members, anything else in the forward work programme? Members, can I just highlight again what we did agree on our away day is next week's meeting, because we are taking briefings from the 5 organisations responsible in the teacher training infrastructure. It is a 9 AM start, just to make members fully aware of that. Members, just be aware all the briefings may be scheduled as they arise and we need to. And the following weekend, 24th of September, is a 9:30 start. It starts with financial scrutiny training, which has been rolled out across all committees.
Bacon, perhaps?
Bacon, box and bread and sauce.
Bread.
Okay, members, we're moving on to the Minister's briefing if he's not there yet.
Well, we thought it would be a quarter past.
Nothing else. Nothing else, no.
Which one?
Could do any other business.
It's an invitation.
Members, if we're waiting on the Minister moving to the last item on the agenda, then is any other business? We'll get that out of the road. If members any other business they want
I'm see if we get on with this first.
to rise at this stage. Members, well, just the Minister will be breaking this briefing down into 2 different sections. The first one's in the provisional outturn and an update on the budget reductions. And he's going to be joined by Derek Baxter, the Permanent Secretary, Heather Cousins, Deputy Secretary, and Stephen McMurray, who's the new Director of Finance, taking over from John Smith. The second one then will be the briefing on the term ahead, so it's just if we could try to keep the two separated. For the provisional outturn and the budget reductions in your packs, page 348 is the briefing paper on the 13-14 provisional outturn, page 352 is the briefing paper on the 14-15 budget reductions, page 358 is the research paper and issues to note supplied by the research assistant. Okay.
Do you want to just read this?
Okay, Minister, you're very welcome, and thank you again for taking
Good morning.
coming with us on our first formal meeting to brief us on your provisional outturn and your updating your budget reductions, as well as your way forward. And can I welcome just Steve McMurray? I think is your first meeting as Director of Finance. Stephen, you're very welcome. You find we're an easy committee to deal with as long as you're
Sometimes.
giving us the right answers.
According to the Minister.
Okay, Minister. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you've all had a nice summer. We've been rather busy, unfortunately, over the summer with some unwanted difficulties to get over. But what I was proposing to do today is to maybe take this in two separate chunks. Originally, we were envisaging this session to be a bit of a look ahead to the forthcoming Assembly term and an opportunity to explore some of the key issues. But obviously, the budget issues have come up on the tracks very quickly. So I was proposing that we maybe just do a first session in around the budget issues, including the outturn figures, and then we would do a second round where we can talk through some of the policy issues and give the committee an opportunity to ask questions within the usual parameters of this is unnotified to us, so we will do our best to answer today, but there may be some issues that we will need to come back to the committee in writing if there are some details that we can't quite provide today to yourselves. And if that's agreeable, we'll proceed on that basis. But just, Chair, you've made mention already about Stephen McMurray. Stephen has taken over as our new Finance Director as of the 1st of September, so this is very much a baptism of fire for him in this regard. And it's worth noting that such is the pool of talent that we have within DEL, that our directors are very heavily sought after. So just for the fuller picture, Colin Boyle, who was previously the Director of the Employment Service, has been promoted to a Grade 3. He's now the new Chief Executive of the Land and Property Service. And John Smith, who was the previous Finance Director, has also been promoted to a Grade 3. And he's now working on a special project within the Department of Education in relation to the Lissanelli shared education scheme. And David Sales is the new Director of the Employment Service, and no doubt you will meet him at an early opportunity. But pressing on then in relation to the budget itself, and I think members will have picked up over the summer both the quantum of cuts that are being asked of departments and also a lot of the wider political discussions around some of that, and indeed the media comments, and you may wish to quiz me on some of those later on, just speculating there. I think it's also important. People are aware of the figures that the July monitoring round figure is a 2.1% cut. We have been asked to plan for the October monitoring round on the basis of a 2.3% cut, which amounts to a 4.4% cut. It's worth stressing that's an in-year cut. Happening after the budget year has started, which brings its own particular challenges and also reduces the amount of scope that you have for making adjustments. I have to say as well that that may not be the final in-year position that we are facing at present, and members will be aware of wider pressures that have been identified subsequent to the June monitoring round having been agreed by the Executive. So there may well be more to come during the course of this current financial year. We're also looking ahead to what may well be a very difficult financial situation in 2015-16 and indeed for the 2016-2020 CSR period. And we are seeking to take a view or some consideration of what may be coming down the tracks in terms of how we approach things with respect to the in-year position. You can't really isolate one year from another because a lot of budgets have knock-on consequences into other years. We have nonetheless tried to adopt a strategic approach to what we're doing in year. We are conscious that we have a responsibility to frontline services, in particular to those who are most vulnerable. We also know we have a lot of work to do in terms of supporting the economic transformation of Northern Ireland. So I've tried to keep both of those objectives very much in mind in terms of the approach that we have taken to date, and I think we have by and large achieved that. That said, in the event that we are faced with some deeper cuts, that it may not be possible to maintain that position and that approach any wider. It's also worth stressing as well that we shouldn't see this simply as an exercise in cuts in terms of then a reduction in terms of existing services. We also have to look to the opportunity costs, things that we may have otherwise wanted to do that we can no longer now do. And in some ways those are the hidden costs, the missed opportunities that we cannot take forward any longer. Another point I think is worth stressing is the certain inequity around the ring fencing of the Department of Education's budget. And the impact that has on my department, the Department for Employment and Learning. At the outset, can I say I don't believe there's a justification for the ring fencing of education at all, but that decision has been taken. We have a situation where, if you look at the 16 to 19 cohort, some 40% of those young people are availing of services provided through further education and training programmes. The money available to support them has not been protected in relation to what goes through my department, but it has been protected through what goes through the Department of Education with respect to school provision, and also bearing in mind the different demographic profile of young people who go through those different strands. I think there is a certain equality issue as well, alongside the inequity of the decision that was actually taken itself. That said, we have sought to protect, as far as we can, the impact upon those young people, but that comes at the price of cuts and adjustments having to be made elsewhere within our budget. We've given you a paper that sets out how we are planning to meet the 4.4% cuts, and we're happy to answer any questions you have in relation to those. The stress that we have taken the approach of proceeding to make known the full level of cuts at this stage, because I think we have to plan on that basis, and to do otherwise I think would be a foolish, counterproductive way of approaching things. I think we have to take things in the round in this regard, and if we're faced with or notified of further cuts, then we'll have to come back and look at that in due course. And you have the figures there in relation to the provisional outturn, and we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. I suppose you have, starting off with the cuts, which I think is the one that has hit, I suppose, members of this committee the most over the summer with your announcements via press and, I suppose, little engagement with the committee, but something that, well, I know I took exception to, and I think there could have been even informal communication with us before you made some of your announcements as a matter of courtesy. But we are where we are. In regard to your 4.4% cut, and you've given us a paper here of proposals and the way your department may make those savings, what engagements have you had to date with the stakeholders who are going to be affected?
Well, first of all, can I comment on the engagement or lack of engagement with the committee? Obviously, this all happens during the course of the summer, and indeed, the quantum that we were facing was gradually escalating as the prolonged negotiations around the June monitoring round proceeded. All I have said over the course of the summer in public was to talk about the implications at a very high level. So the actual figures that before the committee today, that is when the first opportunity we're taking to make those public and actually showing how we're actually proposing to address the cuts that we are facing in year. And it's also worth noting that we have taken the opportunity to come to the committee at its first session after the recess, and I believe I'm probably the First Minister in that regard to be making that full comment on what actually is going to be happening. I appreciate the Health Minister has been there presenting options and the impact of the cuts. So I think we have acted as appropriately and as quickly as we could in that context. Unfortunately, I mean, if we had the opportunity to do this properly, there would be engagement with stakeholders. Indeed, there would be a proper public consultation. In relation to a budget-setting exercise, indeed, it has to be a public consultation, and that will be the case in relation to the 15-16 budget. This is a slightly different beast in the sense that we're talking here about a monitoring round, and we're all used to monitoring rounds over the past number of years in this Assembly. I think at every occasion in this Assembly about how resources have been allocated on an additional basis. This is the first time we've been faced with in-year reductions, and the scale of those is actually in itself dramatic. We've had to move very quickly given the in-year pressures. We took the opportunity to notify our arm's length bodies in July as to what was likely to be coming down the tracks. So they had a degree of notice, and they were warned to plan for cuts coming through. And where necessary, we have engaged with the stakeholders to notify them in advance of making the figures public as to what's going to happen. For example, the reductions in relation to the universities, that has been communicated to them already.
Yeah, can I just add, Chair? I mean, to reinforce the Minister's point, I think it was the day after the Executive took the decision on the quantum of cuts, we wrote to all of our arm's length bodies, putting them on notice and giving them some idea of the scale of magnitude of what was going to happen. I have to say the final decisions on the quantum of cuts for an official, as opposed to a minister, came quite quickly. You know, we were talking about one figure, and then it very quickly rose to another figure as a result of the decision to protect the Department of Education. So we had something in mind, and then something else much bigger transpired. But we engaged immediately with our arm's length bodies. But I think another point is, and you talk about our stakeholders quite rightly, we have many dozens of stakeholders in the sort of community, voluntary, social enterprise sectors, with whom we have, I suppose, contractual commitments through letters of offer and contracts. And in addressing the budget reductions exercise, we have to protect those because we have contractual commitments. So we will not be, at this stage, resiling from any of those contractual commitments.
Okay. Minister, you said, well, we spoke about the 4.4%. You said there was more to come potentially within this financial year.
Yeah.
When or where do you see that coming? But, you know, if we go to the length of October monitoring,
Yeah.
where post-October monitoring is going to be a further cut?
Well, the final October monitoring round position has yet to be agreed by the Executive. As part of the July, or sorry, I should say the official June monitoring round, sometimes we will lapse into calling it the July monitoring round because it happened on the last day in July. As part of that, it was agreed that departments would plan on the basis of a further 2.3% cut being levied as part of the October monitoring round. Now, it's since transpired that there are a host of other pressures in the system. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of what the Finance Minister may say collectively on behalf of the Executive and the overall position that's being faced, but members will be aware of the particular focus that has been around pressures in the health budget, and also public comments that have been made by a number of ministers from different parties around the need to address that in some shape or form. There are some other pressures in the system that's not for me to articulate. Those are for other ministers. And while this will have to be bottomed out, there is a danger that there may well be a further cut asked of departments in the year. And I mean, this is a very deep and serious position that we find ourselves in, both as an executive as a whole and also as a department. And what I say in terms of my department, I'm sure every other minister would be saying the same. The earlier that we are aware of what we're going to be asked to accommodate in the year, the easier, well, I would say easier, the better it's going to be in terms of managing that. But I would expect that we would know perhaps what is going to be the final situation with respect to cuts for this year as part of the October monitoring round. The caveat I would say on that, however, is that the June monitoring round wasn't agreed until the end of July, and if the October monitoring round isn't agreed until November, December, January, then we're facing up to a next to an impossible situation if you're being asked to make further cuts of more than 1% over a potentially 3, 4, 5 month window.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, it's a technical point, but it's an obvious point. You know, even the October monitoring figure of 2.3%, that is predicated on 12 months of your budget. But we've already spent over half of our budget by the time we get to October monitoring, so the effect of 2.3% is much deeper than that. So as the Minister says, the longer any decision is delayed on a further raft of cuts, the more pain, but in practical terms, the more difficulty it will be, the more difficult it will be to deliver, and the greater the risk to an accounting officer like me of overspending, which is unlawful.
Unless directed.
Well, first of all, can I say that on the record, I'm not going to be asking or directing the accounting officer to overspend, to make that very clear. In any event, even if I was to attempt to do that, there are checks and balances within the system with respect to ministers. In the event, and Derek can keep me correct on this, if I was minded, which I stress I am not, to direct the accounting officer, I'm sure you're deeply reassured on that point, to overspend, he would be required to notify DFP of what is a contentious direction. In turn, that has to be signed off by DFP themselves in the context where there's a highlighted risk of an overspend in the system, which would contribute to the Northern Ireland bloc as a whole breaching its expenditure limits. That would create an extraordinarily difficult situation for Northern Ireland vis-à-vis the Treasury, and DFP would intervene at that stage. So there is a check and balance in the system that even if a minister was minded to direct an overspend, that would be counterbalanced. Did I miss something there?
For the record, can I say I'm very grateful for the Minister's assurance that he's not going to give me such a direction. It would place me in a very difficult position. But anyway,
Okay.
I've explained it correctly, Minister.
Minister, picking up, I suppose, on one piece of your reduction of the detail you've actually given to the committee before I go to other members, 7.4 million reduction to the annual block grant allocations to the universities and university colleges. Now, in your risks, you acknowledge that it'll further erode our competitive position in regard to universities. Also in your briefing, you referred to the potential of there was hidden monies there that we could be utilising or raising. Has the department any intention to look at student fees?
Well, first of all, on student fees, no, that's not on the table for further reconsideration. Indeed, that was a decision that's taken by the Executive. Now, it's my understanding that there's a lot of support across the board for the freezing in line with inflation of tuition fees for local students at local universities. And I think for the foreseeable future, that's something that we would wish to be maintaining. And it wouldn't be simply a decision for this department in any event, it would be a decision for the Executive as a whole. That in turn, I think, probably does lead into the second aspect, Chair, of your question, or the first aspect you cited, the erosion of the long-term competitive position of the universities. Now, the cut that we have levied against universities in year is about 3.95%, so it's less than the 4.4% that the department is experiencing. We've had no choice but to pass on a large element of cuts to the universities, but it is coming in at a lower rate than the figure for the department. That will be for the universities themselves to manage, and again they're having to face up to that on an in-year basis, and that may well pose some challenges for them. But arising out of that, and also as a comment arising out of our decision around tuition fees, I think it's important that the committee is aware that the amount of money we're spending per university place in Northern Ireland is less than the comparative situation elsewhere in these islands. We have a situation where universities, through the ability to charge higher level fees, have additional streams of income coming in. We don't. We're much more in a flatlining situation. You'll know that there's 4 different bands for the funding of university places, band A, B, C and D, and that relates to the costs that are involved. For example, something like medicine would be at the top because there's a lot of equipment involved in that, and a lot of the arts and humanities courses, which are more sort of book or internet in these days based, would be lower cost. But the differential across those bands between the comparators, UK average, is about 1,000 to 2,500 per university place. Now, you can say we can do things more efficiently and at a lower cost than elsewhere, which is fine, but equally we need to take some cognizance of the fact that there is a danger that we are potentially eroding the amount of money we're investing and hence the quality of those places. And I don't want to see a situation where we are providing cheaper education but of an inferior quality to what's available elsewhere. We have to make sure we are providing easy access to our local students, but also ensure that we have a proper product for them. Now, that's an issue I will be highlighting with the executive, that we have a corroding position in relation to the amount of money we're investing in our university places. But I don't think that's going to necessarily be resolved, nor should it be, through reopening the issue around tuition fees.
Okay. Just a quick one then. Tuition fees are an executive priority. So was the United Youth Programme, but you're taking money from it?
Yeah, well, that money we're taking relates to monies that we were investing internally for that. We have been, you will be aware that we have reallocated some money from the Youth Employment Scheme to United Youth, and that was given approval as part of the June monitoring round paper. Can I say that we have taken the decision to actually ensure that we have sufficient budget in year to progress United Youth. I do regard it as being a priority for the executive. It's also a priority for me in terms of the department. What we have done through what is a 0.5 million reduction in United Youth is just provide a more realistic budget in the context of what we are likely to do this year, in this financial year, in relation to some pilot projects. It's likely that we will be authorising a number of projects later on this autumn, and I think it's just a decision to recognise that we're unlikely to spend the full budget available to us at this point in the year. But this does not reflect a rowing back by me or indeed the department in terms of our commitment to United Youth proceeding. It just avoids a situation where we would have an underspend at the end of the year, just in terms of the sheer logistics of getting pilots off the ground.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Robin, and thanks for Minister. There's two different cuts. There's a 2.1% cut and a 2.3% cut. Can you give us the rationale for the first cut of 2.1% and why that's been imposed in your department?
Well, I'll give the rationale for both of those. The 2.1% cut reflects the decision of the executive on the advice of the finance minister to address all of the overcommitment that's been built up in terms of the Northern Ireland budget, in terms of the assessment that was made during June, and also to address a number of pressures that had emerged for example, things like around the historical abuse inquiry and things like that. The 2.3% cut, which we are required to plan in relation to October monitoring round, reflects the fact that there's 87 million that we will be having to return to Treasury in relation to welfare reform issues.
But the 2.3% reduction hasn't necessarily been agreed or commenced. You're simply planning for it.
Well, I am proceeding, to be very, very clear, as of now, I am proceeding on the basis of 4.4% cuts in year. If anyone thinks that the situation in October is going to be any less than that, I think they're not really accepting the reality of what's come down the road at us. The pressure, if anything, the pressure will be more in October than less than that. And for me, indeed for Derek as accounting officer, to sit back and only proceed on the basis of 2.1% cuts for now, I'm sure we'll wait and see what's agreed by the Executive in October, would be the height of irresponsibility, because we would be leaving ourselves potentially 2-3 months shorter time available during the course of the year to absorb those, and we will be doing that in an even less strategic manner than has been forced upon us to date. The Executive has agreed that departments should proceed on the basis of 2.3% cut. That has to be officially ratified in October, but all accounting officers have been instructed to proceed on the basis of a 4.4% cut, and I think any responsible department would be doing the same as us, and I believe most of them are doing just that.
I think from a financially prudent point of view, I suppose that's what you have to do. I don't think too many would criticise you for it, but I take it you're not very confident that there'll be political agreement between now and October, then?
I imagine, Phil, you may be better able to inform me of that than my best guess.
Well, I've yet to see minutes of an executive meeting, so I don't know what you've discussed in there, so maybe you could tell us.
Well, you know what happens behind executive is confidential, but from what's been discussed publicly, you will all be aware that there's a number of very large debates that are occurring between the political parties at present.
Well, the 2.3% reduction is around the future of the welfare system and the political differences that exist there. And we've seen the implications of a 2.3% cut in your budget. But what would be the implication for people that need DAIL services that would be impacted if the Executive was to agree to the proposed welfare cuts that's on the table at the minute? Well,
if the Executive agrees to proceed with the reforms to welfare, I mean, we will be bringing ourselves into line with what's happening elsewhere. I mean, I have no particular appetite for the reforms that are taking place, but I recognise that we don't have the resources in Northern Ireland to maintain an independent welfare system. So our only option is that we work on the basis of parity, and where we can negotiate variances from that, then that's fine, and that's what has occurred up until now. Again, the Executive could make some further decisions which they will self-fund, but you have to work to in essence the template that is generated in Westminster, and the party system has been something that's been deeply embedded in our politics and our governance for the past 60-70 years, and I think for us to move outside that it is folly. I would maybe turn your question on its head. If we are asked to make constant cuts to DAIL services to fund money being handed back to the Treasury, then there will be a major impact on our ability to help our client base, because that means that we will be impacting upon our employment schemes, our training schemes, our assistance to those who are unemployed, the investment we make in students, whether that's in the colleges or universities, our ability to invest in apprenticeships. That's important for the economy as a whole. It's also important to give people life opportunities. I don't want to see a situation where we are simply investing our resources to maintain people in welfare dependency. The best way that we can help people is through making sure we're investing in things like public health, improving life expectancy, investing in early years education, which is identified as the best way strategically to make sure that people have the best skills in the long run. and then through what we do as a department, which is very much involved about getting people who lack skills, who are unemployed, into the labour market, and if they are able to find and secure a sustainable job, that's going to be have a positive impact upon a whole host of issues, including their health, as well as their ability to generate a better income than they would have on welfare. And there's a real danger if we focus on a very narrow agenda around what we do or don't do on welfare, we will miss that much bigger picture.
See, this is what ministers always do. They always turn questions in their head. But I asked you the question I wanted you to answer, not the question you want to answer.
But I did answer your question first.
No, you told me once again the impact of a 2.3% cut in your budget, but you didn't tell me what the impact of removing 750 million from the pockets of people in our society that need it the most would be. Do you think that the welfare reform agenda that's been proposed here will actually help people get back to work?
Well, I think if you look at the issue around universal credit, and it's important that we don't basically badge all of what's being labelled as welfare reform as being something that's counterproductive or a hindrance to people. There are aspects of this, particularly around universal credit, where, particularly around that benefits trap, where we're seeking to overcome that and to make a situation where going into work, whether on a full-time or part-time basis, becomes more attractive to people. That would have positive benefits in terms of society. And Chair, I'm sort of conscious I'm straying into sort of areas of the Executive and indeed the Minister for Social Development, but given that the question has been asked, I mean, there is a dispute over what has actually been withdrawn from Northern Ireland, and members will be fully aware of those discussions. I would rather that we weren't seeing a situation where people were being impacted around things like DLA and some other benefits. But those are decisions that are out of our hands, and we have to recognise that we are a devolved region of the UK, and while we technically have power over social security, we are in a financial dependency situation. Would I like to see us in a much stronger position in terms of our local economy? Absolutely yes, but that is the reality where we are today, and it does not make any sense for us to try to go solo on these issues.
Okay,
Stephen, keep that going to next week.
I'm sure.
Pat?
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning.
Very welcome. Clearly, it's, none of us would envy your task, to be honest, in these present circumstances, but you'll not be surprised that the main subject on my lips would be a constituency-related matter, which the Chair alluded to earlier on. Your comments during the summer, which came, I must say, in my own constituency with anger, frustration and despair when you put the dampers on any movement in terms of McGee. What did surprise me, Minister, that given that your department was fully aware that a business case collectively was being prepared, there was a unity of purpose in the city from the community and voluntary sector, from the business community, from the statutory sector, including your own officials involved in this business plan. The way you took the initiative to put the dampers on that, given that it was a matter, of course, a matter for the Executive to decide, given it was the Executive who supported the Economic Regeneration Plan, priority within the one plan. So I'm asking you, Minister, in good faith, was this the right step to make, given that there has been, and I'll make it very clear, serious anger, because you made reference earlier on to economic transformation. This was the biggest project this constituency of Foyle would ever seen in terms of economic regeneration purposes.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Pat. Now, I mean, at the outset, you referred to I think it was the anger, frustration and despair that was felt in Derry in the Northwest on the back of the comments I made. I think it's worth saying that, that pales into insignificance to, the anger, frustration, despair I feel, and countless other people feel, at the current financial situation that we are having to deal with in Northern Ireland, and the implications that are going to flow from that. Now, let me be very clear on a couple of things in relation to McGee. What I have said is to make a public comment on the implications of my budget. We have a situation where I have informed, and indeed had informed, the universities that significant cuts were going to be coming their way. That means that our ability to grow our higher education sector in Northern Ireland is going to be constrained until we can begin to reverse those type of cuts. The expansion of Magee is the only proposal out there at this stage for an expansion in a specific location in Northern Ireland. And I think it is fair comment and quite legitimate comment for me to say that in the context where we are asking the universities to cut back in terms of what they can do due to no fault of their own, that the notion of an expansion of higher education is complete and utter fantasy, because you can't cut and expand at the same time. They are mutually exclusive directions of travel. In relation to what you say is an executive commitment and the programme for government, there is actually a myth that has grown up that the executive has a commitment to the expansion of the University of Ulster at Magee. There is no reference in the programme for government to the expansion of Magee. There is a reference in the programme for government to the implementation, supporting the implementation of the One Plan. The only particular references that flow from that relate to Fort George and Ebrington. As a department, we have never been asked to report on progress in relation to the expansion of the university. Indeed, whenever I assumed office, and at the same time that the budget had already been struck and we were moving into a programme for government, there was no drive commitments being made towards the expansion of Magee. We have had an expansion of the university there over the past number of years through the efforts of this department to make that happen. And there's three different strands as to how we've gone about doing that. The first one was on the back of the tuition fee settlement. We bid for resources. We ended up with £3 million, which allowed us to do a certain amount of expansion of the higher education sector. But that was an initiative that we took, and that was to address what was going to be increased demand across the sector as a whole. We then made a further bid in relation to the Jobs and Economy initiative, again about making an investment in higher education as a whole. And we have also found money within our own budget from redirecting money from different areas and made some further investments. So all of the expansion in the university has been generated through our own initiative as a department, some of it endorsed by the executive. But at no stage was there a budget, never mind a programme for government commitment from the executive that Magee would be expanded. At all stages it was an aspiration. Now, with respect to the business case, and I have clarified this point publicly as well, we will receive the business case, and indeed we have received part of it already. We've made a commitment that we will process that business case and be in a position, if the circumstances are right, to make a bid for the investment of the additional university places. That will likely be relevant in relation to the 16-20 CSR period. But I have to say, in the context where we're facing 4.4% plus in-year cuts this year, potentially even more severe cuts next year, and a potentially catastrophic position in the 16-20 CSR period, I can't conceive how we can actually make a bid for those places at the same time as we're dramatically cutting back in a whole host of areas, including in terms of higher education. In conjunction with that, we're also planning to make a bid in relation to the teaching block during the 15-16 year, but that's capital money as opposed to revenue. So we will still proceed on that basis. So we will keep the door open in relation to the expansion of Magee, but I think I have to be very clear that people's expectations in this regard have to be very, very realistic. The money isn't there today, and the money is fast moving out of our budgets rather than coming in to enable us to do things like that.
I appreciate your very detailed response, but I don't think it's helpful to use terminology such as we're living in Fantasy Island, literally as regards this project. If we are living in a fantasy that you believe so, then you should abandon the business case. You should tell people up front, because I do believe, Minister, the decision on this is not solely for yourself, and I appreciate that it was never ever going to come out of your budget. It would have been for the executive to determine. And I'm afraid I have to contest your assumption that on the One Plan it was only Fort George or Ebrington was part of it. The One Plan's key priority coming out of the One Plan was economic regeneration and expansion of Magee campus. So I'll have to contest your own, what you believe was on it. So is it not a case that, for example, that the Deputy First Minister has very clearly stated, very publicly, that he still wants to see the campus to be extended, and he would be supportive of it entirely coming to the executive?
Well, let me clarify a couple of points, Pat. I mean, first of all, the references I was quoting from was from the Programme for Government, not the One Plan. The One Plan does have targets in relation to the expansion of the university. The Programme for Government makes reference to the One Plan, but makes references to the One Plan in relation to Fort George and Ebrington. And we have never been at any stage monitored on the back of the Programme for Government in relation to the expansion of the university. So that is the interpretation of the language in the Programme for Government that has been accepted over the past three years or so. Can I also say that I personally want to see the expansion of the university in Derry? I mean, I understand the importance of the university to the city. I understand the historical context around decisions that have been taken in the past. So all things being equal, I would like to see it proceeding. But I also have to be realistic. And if I am using quite stark language, then that is perhaps a means of maybe conveying the seriousness of the situation that we are facing in and around our budgets, because there's frustration out there in that as we're being asked to make these cuts, and across a whole host of departments, ministers will be saying the same things. We're coming up and saying, well, we can't do A, B and C, and people are saying, actually, we want you cutting in A, B and C. And you sort of go, well, what do you want us to do? I mean, I'm losing £34.5 million out of my budget this year. Could be more than that, potentially a lot more next year. That involves some very difficult and painful decisions. And we have to have a grasp of reality that we can't be doing that type of exercise and at the same time proceeding with fresh investments. I've really alluded to the fact that we have a funding gap in terms of the amount of money we're investing in our university places. And if we were simply just piling on more and more places, stretching our budgets to meet some notional target, if we're doing that at the price of hollowing out the amount of money we're investing, then we're doing no one a service. We're not doing a service to our economy as a whole. We're not doing a service to students, because we're going to be providing a poorer quality of universities and higher education. And that's the last thing, and I'm sure it's the last thing that the committee wants to be achieving. I mean, this time last year, you were having a major exhibition for the universities in the Long Gallery. You had a motion on the floor of the Assembly. The committee were showing leadership around the issue of how important higher education is to our society. In order to make sure we are delivering and meeting the expectations of our local companies and with investors, we have to ensure that we're producing quality graduates. That means we are investing properly in the teaching around that. So my first priority has to be to ensure that I am protecting the quality in our higher education. Where we can expand, we will seek to expand. But that has to be a secondary consideration to ensure we have a quality service and we're not lowering our standards in that respect. If the budget situation dramatically gets turned around, and who knows, that may well be the case, then obviously we're in a situation where we can make that bid. But at the moment, the trajectory on our budgets is dramatic, and I don't think people quite grasp the scale of what's about to unfold, particularly from the 2016 financial year onwards.
Chair, I don't want to take over the meeting over them again. I appreciate the time I've had and appreciate the ministers. The positivity I'm taking out of it, Minister, is you are personally committed to it. And, you know,
Yes.
What we want to see is the delivery of the business cases sustained, that you're in a position to make that bid to the executive to conclude that business and that. Just going on to some other, you made reference to the teaching block. Are you confident enough now that the teaching block, the capital monies in terms of the business case has been sustained?
Well, I can't give any assurances in that regard. All I can say is that it is my desire that we will be in a position to make a bid in 15-16 for that. That's for the executive as a whole to respond to, but with a fair wind, hopefully that will happen.
But is there a business case there which is sustained?
There's a business case. I'm not sure of the exact status of the business case, whether we have received it formally or whether we are about to receive it, but we're about to, but we will progress it as quickly as we can.
If we can just add to that, Chair, we've been working with the university to refine the business case and get it into a shape shape, and so I think we're almost at the point of receiving a final business case. As the Minister says, in our list of capital projects that we want to proceed with, the teaching block is in there, so we will be making a bid. There's full commitment on the part of the department. We don't have the budget this year. It'll depend on 15-16. And the only thing I would say by way of comfort is that in the cuts in this year, capital has not been affected. Now, I do not know what will happen in 15-16.
Chair, there's just two other queries. In terms of what specific programmes have been identified within the department that will be detrimental in going forward? We are aware of a number of strategies that the department have developed, certainly over recent times, very good strategies that will make an impact. For example, economic and activity strategy, a bid was to be made to the executive for the funding for that. Where does that stand?
You make a very valid point in that regard. By way of introduction to respond to this, we are trying to take a strategic approach to the way we're addressing things. Whether we can sustain that in the long run remains to be seen. So we are seeking to avoid impacting upon, for example, our new apprenticeship strategy, our work in youth training. I've explained in response to the Chair what we're doing around United Youth, that we still want that to proceed. On economic inactivity, I have to say, Pat, that there is no budget assigned for economic inactivity. It had been our assumption that we would be making a bid for resources from the Executive in that regard. I think the financial context has moved very dramatically. And while we may well still make such a bid, I think its prospects are going to be much the poorer.
Yeah, Chair, something I might come back to the Minister Serbia on. Finally, in terms of the hardship fund, which is getting a lot of relevance in media terms recently, and the case where a number of the colleges in particular are setting up food banks for vulnerable students, what position is the department in terms of, will there be further reductions in the hardship fund this year?
I have to say, my colleagues may come in a bit more. That's a very big unfinally, by the way, given the controversy around this at present. This is a source of huge frustration to me in terms of what people are saying about the hardship fund publicly. The hardship fund is a demand-led scheme. It is there to invest in students within the further education sector. We have been moving our resource to further education awards. So the overall budget that combines further education awards and the hardship funds has actually increased over the past 5 years. So as a department, we are spending more money on support for students. Because of the investment in further education awards, there's now less money being drawn down in relation to the hardship funds because we have front-loaded the system in terms of the FE awards, which is a more strategic way of investing in student support within further education. So we're being accused of having made a cut to a budget which we have not made, and I say that very clear and very categorically. We have not cut the budget for hardship awards. There's been less money drawn down from that. It is a purely demand-led scheme, and where someone is eligible for a hardship fund, we will make that award. The amount of money we have been investing, even per student, across both FE awards and hardship funds has been increasing, in addition to the increase overall in the monies available for support for students in further education. So we are doing this in a responsible way, and that's not to deny that individual students may nonetheless be in difficult circumstances, and we are happy to see what we can do to signpost people better in that regard. And also, I think the comments being made about food banks across our colleges, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration. There has been a particular initiative at North West College, but to say we have food banks across all of our colleges sort of to alleviate students who are in hardship, I think is a gross misrepresentation of the situation.
No, is it possible then, because we had research papers last week at our away day that were suggesting that a number of colleges had dramatic cuts and their monies available for hardship. Could we have clarity over the money's bid for each college and much money was submitted? Because the Minister is suggesting that money is requested for was granted. But that's not the sort of papers we were getting in this. I'm misinterpreting what information was in front of us.
Okay, more than happy to provide as much detail as we can to the committee. I mean, there's just 3 points I would make. The total amount of money available to alleviate student hardship has increased. It is demand-led, and here's the important point. We have asked, and we have yet to find any student who was eligible for support having been refused.
So,
And that's
if we can have the
that's a
information
really
for the last
important
5
point.
years, Derek, it would be very
Yeah.
helpful.
Yes,
The
yes.
bids were made, what was granted.
Yeah.
We will provide you with the full figures around the at Northern Ireland level and broken down by college by college.
Yeah, I mean, that last point I make, the point I'm making there is there has been no rationing of the support made available to students in hardship. Anyone who has applied and has met the eligibility criteria, and they're all set out, has been supported.
Thanks, Chair.
But we'll provide the details.
Can I just ask clarity then? One of your savings indicators that you've put forward to the committee in your paper, there's reductions in resources available centrally to enhance further education provision,
Yes.
a reduction of 5.5 million. Part of the detail on that is a reduction in FE awards, free meals and home to college transport. Surely that's going to have a knock-on effect there as well.
Do you want me to take that, Minister? First of all, the reduction for FE is taken out of money set aside this year for use in future years. Okay, so it's it's a special provision called end-year flexibility, which the further education colleges received when they got non-departmental public body status. So it's money we have set aside for future investment. So that will really bite in future years. We have looked, and it actually goes back to the earlier point, we have looked at the actual budgets required for certain elements of our student support, where demand has actually been less than the budget that has been made available. So we will be reducing the budgets available for those in future years. However, reducing those budgets carries a risk for the department, because if demand increases, and it could do, or we have got our forecasts wrong, then we have a pressure on the department, which we in the department will have to meet should we retain our commitment not to turn away any student who applies and who is eligible to receive support. So that's what that element of it is concerned with.
So just to be very clear, that is a budget forecasting line.
Yeah.
It is not an issue in terms of a reduction of available funds. In the event that demand exceeds what we have put aside in terms of a revised budget line, we will honour that. That means having to find the money elsewhere within the departmental budget and reallocate it across in terms of our own adjustment. This is a more realistic budget line that we're setting at this stage, in line of the forecast drawdown at this point in the year.
And it will affect the next financial year, not this financial year.
Alistair?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister. I don't want to talk too much about welfare reform. It's not what we're here to do, but I think generally I would agree with the Minister's assessment of where we are. I think the cost of not proceeding with welfare reform is less than it will cost us if we don't. Some of us have been warning for months that will be the case, but people have chosen to ignore that. And of course, the irony is those who claim they're blocking welfare reform to protect people will end up hurting them more, and we've heard this morning about some of the programmes that won't be able to be funded. If we can just get into some of the detail about how bad this is going to get. I mean, you've outlined the cuts that are already in place and potentially in the future. You said that you were opposed to ring fencing education. There's also, I'm quite sure there'll be ring fencing, not just ring fencing of health, but there is a bid from the Health Minister for additional funding in health. I'm quite sure that the officials in the department have done quite a bit of work in terms of planning in this area. How bad would the cuts to your department be if the executive agrees not only to ring fence health, but to meet the demands of the Health Minister, where he says that there's a gap in his budget? If that gap was to be filled by the executive, what would the cuts look like in Dell?
Well, I think there's a number of different scenarios here that we maybe just need to allude to. And again, October Monitor Round will be the first opportunity where we will see a revised position. There are a number of different factors here that are imponderables at this stage. Is how much, if any, will the Executive seek to meet the pressures identified by the Health Minister? Will the ring fencing of education continue into the future? What other pressures are likely to emerge in year? We could very easily see an extra percentage or more going on to the cut that we've already been asked to make this year, being imposed on an in-year position. I have made public comment that we are making contingency plans for future years. I think that's the only really responsible thing that we can do as a department. We can't simply just do this from a standing start every year. And while I'm sure there's a hunger to see what we're planning in this regard, I mean, this is very much an exercise that officials are still conducting, and I certainly have made no decisions, nor will I be making until I better know the situation. But nonetheless, people are being asked to think through a whole range of scenarios, and that includes trying to anticipate what a cut in, not this year, but a subsequent year, of potentially more than 10% would mean for this department. Whenever I talk about cutting more than 10%, I'm not talking 11 or 12. It could be even more than that. Once we're in that sort of territory, I mean, we are having a catastrophic impact upon our ability to invest in skills and employability. The wider situation the Executive is facing, obviously the pressure around welfare reform is only one of many pressures that are out there, but that is one that is set to escalate in future years. And once we lose access to a UK-wide computer system and are faced with having to design and maintain our own, those costs around welfare rise very, very dramatically. And at that stage, the system really becomes utterly unsustainable, to be perfectly blunt about it.
And if I can ask the last two questions together, I mean, obviously the in-year cuts is particularly difficult because you've either spent money or you've signed contracts and things like that. So can you give us an idea of which areas currently you have flexibility in and you would have to look at because you've no choice? And in terms of the opportunity cost, clearly if we're talking about a budget reduction in around 15%, if that indeed is what happens, I mean, is it possible for you to continue to run your department? I mean, what programmes would you keep rather than what we're going to lose? Because we're going to be losing many of them, and the opportunity costs that you talked about at the very beginning. Yeah. I mean, the apprenticeship programme, all those sort of stuff that we've been working on for the last number of years will be gone. So what would the core of your department be if you're facing a 15% reduction?
Well, I think the key issue there is to what extent, first of all, we have an opportunity as an Executive to take a strategic approach insofar as we're taking a strategic approach whenever big issues aren't being addressed. But within the parameters we find ourselves, to what extent the Executive can take a strategic approach to this. And this means, I'm not particularly wishing to scaremonger here, but this means issues about, is there going to be a collective approach across the Executive towards redundancy issues in terms of headcount within the civil service and potentially our arm's length bodies? I mean, those are the type of issues that people are going to have to begin to contemplate. I mean, there can continue to be a Department of Employment and Learning. We can continue to deliver services in the context even of a 10% plus cut, but some very difficult, tough decisions will have to be taken over what is prioritised and what isn't. And you may well find a situation where you're dropping entire programmes at that stage and severely curtailing others. To give one very clear example of that, we are probably no longer talking about a situation of whether we expand McGee or higher education elsewhere. We will be discussing a situation where universities will have no choice but to reduce the number of university places that they have, for example, and that has major implications for our ability to grow the economy, because we all know how important skilled graduates, particularly in key areas, are so we'll continue to have some apprenticeships, some university places. We'll have our FE colleges, but they'll all be doing a lot less than what has been the case to date.
I think, the Minister mentioned, I mean, Mr. Ross is correct. We've got a lot of contractual commitments in areas such as steps to work and then steps to success and pathways to success and so forth, and we'll honour that. So the discretionary areas of spend are shrinking and largely does fall on FE and HE in year, that is, but it's the opportunity cost too. I mean, yesterday the Minister was involved in a great job announcement, 300 high-level, high-salary jobs in Deloitte. The reason that project came was largely because of Dell being able to respond quickly and put in place an academy for pre-training. We will lose the ability to provide that investment. We will lose the ability to put in place a welding academy at short notice, working with employers. And ironically, those are the very kinds of projects that we need to grow the economy to provide jobs. So we get into a vicious downward cycle.
Thanks, Chair.
No, so you said a 10% cut, the department could survive with it. At a 10% cut, you balance the equation and then realise, is there any need for a Department of Employment and Learning, and actually get back to divvying up the responsibilities between education and DETI?
Well, I think that's it. I didn't say that the department could survive the cut. I mean, the department would survive in the context of the cut, but the impact would be massive, and I don't think we should be underplaying or underestimating that in any shape or form. I mean, I am open to a proper rationalisation of departments. I mean, that's my party position. That's something I have advocated myself, and there can be a more joined up way in which we can deliver a whole host of services across a range of different functions of government. That's something that the executive as a whole needs to take a view on as to what's the best configuration in that regard, and no doubt this department would play a major role in that. I have to say, though, that there is a very coherent narrative that we have developed as a department around the skills and employability agenda, and I think it's important that the functions of the department would stay together in terms of any restructuring that was to occur. I would also probably stress that the amount of financial savings you would get from a rationalisation of departments would be fairly minimal. I think there's tough decisions elsewhere on what departments do that would be on the table in terms of trying to meet any mass savings. Where the logic of a rationalisation of departments is about service delivery and the way you can build stronger linkages between service areas rather than necessarily the financial savings that will come directly from that type of reorganisation.
Tom, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think, Minister, we're just beginning to see the tip of the iceberg and the pain that's going to be felt in the lack of agreement by some parties on welfare reform. But that's what we're facing. In the light of all of this and all the cuts that's coming and so forth that's looming out there, how do you propose to protect the frontline services? Obviously, like I see where there's a reduction here in demand-led skills and all of that type of thing. So how do you plan to protect that and to be able to hold on to the situation as you talked about? Where we saw 300 plus jobs there the other day been announced, and that was because of work that the department was able to do quickly. That is something that we need to be holding on to. So how do you propose to do that in light of all the cuts that's coming?
Well, I very much concur with the points that you've made, Tom. It's worth noting that what we've sought to do this year is to try to protect the front line, to take a strategic approach to protect the most vulnerable. And just to give some examples of that, beyond what we have in terms of contractual obligations, we have sought to protect, for example, what we're doing through the employment service. We haven't impacted on that so far. The same applies to our investment around disability provision. Again, we've sought to protect that. And again, I have to caveat that so far. We have protected what we're doing in terms of investment in apprenticeships. Again, so far. So we have looked at where the biggest impact on either people who are vulnerable or what's the most critical for the economy in terms of how we take this forward. But as this escalates, there can be no guarantees around this. As much as I can try to juggle things and to protect those areas that have the biggest impact on people, there comes a point where that becomes impossible to do. Another good example of that is around the further education sector that the Chair's already alluded to. We have sought to try to manage what we have had to pass on to the FE sector through impacting on the end-year flexibility and money that we were holding back to invest in some additional FE projects rather than necessarily hitting their agreed budgets for this year. That will no longer be an option next year in terms of further education. So we will be eating into the front line in FE the minute that there's any further cuts levied against us. And we can't avoid that. So that's my honest assessment as to where we are at the moment.
So you're really, sorry?
So I was just going to add a point. I mean, it's slightly facetious, but I think it gives you an idea of the scale of magnitude. You know, if I I'm not going to do this obviously, but if I decided to shut the department down today, told everybody you're all redundant, turn the lights out and turn the IT off and stop paying everybody from now to the end of the year, that would save about 1% of our total budget. We've got in-year cuts to make of 4.4%. So it's, you know, and obviously that's a silly suggestion I'm making because everything would stop, but you know, that's where we are. So protecting the front line is going to get increasingly difficult.
You're really issuing a warning in a sense that frontline services will be affected in some way or another. But where does this now leave the department's commitment in relation to the economic strategy and programme for government?
Well, at this stage, we are hopeful of continuing to meet our targets in that regard. With respect to the programme for government, the targets have by and large been met. Where there's a certain vulnerability is over the timescale around the production of the strategy on economic activity, where that has, to be frank, slipped. Though we are expecting to have a strategy before the executive around November and something in place for the beginning of April next year. Our targets around moving people into work and the numbers of qualifications will be met as things currently stand. And again, I'm very conscious of the more particular recommendations in the economic strategy, and we've sought to be strategic around protecting our investment. A key example in that regard is our Shared Skills programme, as Derek has alluded to already. That is critical to supporting the efforts of Invest Northern Ireland in attracting jobs. Now, people will be familiar as to how successful we have been, particularly over the past 12 months, in attracting jobs. Skills is now an even greater element of the attractiveness of Northern Ireland, and also the package of support that we can provide to companies that are wishing to intervene. Now, we have a budget for Shared Skills which is ring-fenced, but which expires at the end of this financial year. We're going to have to replenish that budget next year if we want to continue in that area of work. At this stage, there's no budget, there's no baseline for our budget for Shared Skills going in to next year. We'd have to start from first principles, which means taking money from elsewhere if that's what we choose to do. But in terms of meeting the economic strategy, it's those type of investments that are absolutely critical, alongside then the deeper structural changes in our skills landscape around apprenticeships.
Okay, Tom, Sammy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and the rest of your staff for coming this morning. And certainly, as Pat has said, it's a very difficult task that you're faced with, and I wish you all the best. I think the other thing is that it's a very depressing picture that's presented this morning, but I'm sure it'll be the same at all the committees, because people having to look at cuts here. And I suppose probably going last, most of my questions have been answered, but there were just a couple of points I wanted to make. You mentioned about the growing a sustainable economy and just the impacts of that. Have you had any assessment at this stage about job losses and the likes as a result of these cuts, whether it be in higher education, university or whatever?
Nothing has been formally communicated to us by the universities or colleges in relation to job losses that may arise specifically from this, though that may well be something that does emerge. Particularly with respect to the universities, they are autonomous bodies, and why we get them a grant is for them to manage that in-house, and we would need to be very careful in terms of making any assumptions or disaggregating actions that they may take around their headcount and drawing conclusions as to what particularly triggered those type of outcomes. I would hope that people can maybe manage their budgets in a year in the same way as we are as a department are seeking to do, but pressure on the headcount is going to come as this process, as the situation tightens over the coming months. And again, we're stressing that. I mean, job losses actually come with a price. It's not something you can just eliminate from your bottom line. In addition to the human cost around all of this, there are additional financial costs that have to be borne around that. That's why it's important that I would encourage the executive to have a strategic approach to how we want to manage those type of issues. And that, that's in itself is a huge statement to be making in relation to Northern Ireland. I mean, if a situation around welfare reform and a desire to protect people who are vulnerable is driving the approach being taken to cuts, if on the flip side of that approach people are going to lose their jobs and join the unemployed register and have less income, that is a major impact on society, and it's important we take that in the round.
I'm going to say, it's ironic we're talking like this morning because, as Derek said earlier on, 338 jobs announced yesterday at Deloitte, bringing up the future something like 700 jobs. And you know yourself, over the past number of months, there have been thousands of jobs announcements. So in one sense, we've been doing very well.
Yeah.
But we're coming to the point now where it's going to impact on our potential to train people, educate people for those future jobs.
And again, Sammy, I mean, that's an opportunity for me to stress that as much as I understand the pressure around health and people's desire that the absolute first duty of a state is to invest in the health service to provide placing and justice and security to people, we also have to be conscious of our opportunity to transform our economy. That opportunity, as we are now emerging from recession, is probably as big as it's ever been. Now is the time we need to be investing in our key drivers to really capitalise upon this moment. And there's a danger we're going to stumble if we end up defunding what are our economic levers to meet pressures elsewhere in the economy. And I mean, I really don't want to be going down that line, but that is the current path we're on.
Yeah. You may remember, you may be too young to remember a song, Ian Jury, Reasons to be Cheerful, Part 3.
Yes.
Are there any reasons to be cheerful this morning? Because I was thinking, you know, we've talked again about welfare reform and 87 million potentially from October. Is it 120 million the next year and 200 million? And in a sense, I think the British government are saying plague on both your houses until we get our act together. If we come to, again, this is hypothetical, if we come to some sort of negotiations and hopefully there could be some sort of agreement, is it possible that all those penalties could be clawed back, that the British government may say, OK, you've come to an agreement, you know, here all your fines back again?
I suspect not on that particular point. Let me rise to your challenge for reasons to be cheerful and maybe introduce a little bit of optimism into the situation. I think first of all, sometimes times of great stress can also be a trigger for times of even greater innovation, and we should maybe look at things in that respect. Secondly, I think over the past number of years, we have achieved an awful lot as a department with the support of the committee in a whole host of different types of interventions. Some of those, indeed quite a lot of those, aren't necessarily about investing a lot more money. They're about doing things more sensibly, more rationally. And for example, the current review of careers, building upon the report of the committee, is a very good example of that, where we can do a much more efficient matching of supply and demand within the economy without pouring more and more money into it. And we can try to build upon those type of interventions and that type of approach. So there's things that we can and will continue to do that will make our economy better. But there are other things that do require an investment of resources in that area where we're in danger of shooting ourselves in the foot. But it's not all doom and gloom in terms of everything we do across the board. There are things that we will continue to do that will make life better in terms of the economy. But there are others that we will be.
Just finally, Chair, just one small reason to be cheerful, certainly for ourselves in East Belfast and beyond, is that you certainly took a leap of faith with the Welding Academy. And I was down with Hornwood recently, saying there's a potential for more oil rigs coming in. So be able to train local people to actually access those jobs.
Absolutely. And it is worth stressing that that is actually a certain leap of faith, because it is speculative training. And my dear friend Derek here could get his knuckles rapped one stage in the future by the Public Accounts Committee if this all comes to nothing and work doesn't come to pass, and hopefully that you'll all go easy on him whenever he appears in future years. And people ask that questions, and Sammy and Chris were instrumental in arguing that we would go down that line. But I do think it is a very good example, though, of how we can respond flexibly. It's actually a very good example of how devolution works.
Yes.
Because that type of intervention would not have happened under direct rule. Again, I share your optimism that the work will come, because a very good job was done on the last piece. It was much more complicated than people originally envisaged. And Harland did step up to the plate in that regard. So I think based upon that track record, they should be in a good position to get more work in the future.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Brad?
Sure. And I had hoped to start off like the beginning. I mean, to talk about youth unemployment, to talk about the apprenticeships, to talk about teacher training, talk about.
We'll come to that still.
First next.
It was like you thought the Minister was fully expecting the comments coming from the DUP and had the answers already in terms of welfare cuts that are coming up. Given the fact that there has been no cuts at present to that, but what we're dealing with, and I think that has been put aside as a $4 billion cut that we took a number of years ago, that's still playing itself out across the local budgets. And I would obviously like to just deal with the effects of the cuts that it's affecting us now, and then start to deal with some of the problems that may come down the road. I can understand Alistair, because Alistair's been at this for months now, coming on about talking about the cost of not implementing welfare reform. I'm actually quite surprised that Sammy banned into the idea, given the work that he's done.
Spending $1,000 million.
Members, Brad, can you get spread the question to the Minister maybe?
That's okay. See, I think there's a number of things that hasn't been taken, and I've asked the question a number of times at this committee. NICFA estimated there will be a $750 million withdrawal from the economy through welfare reform, and that's what they say, a fairly low estimate, and that hasn't been taken into consideration when you're working out budgets, how it will impact on communities that already suffer from high unemployment and suffer from social deprivation. People here spoke about, and especially yourself spoke about, the rollout of universal credit. There are huge difficulties, huge problems with universal credit in England. As a matter of fact, it started off, I think it said that there would be a £2 billion budget for the rollout. It's now up to £12.5 billion. They said that there would be over 1.5 million people would be dealt with through universal credit. To date, there's 7,000. Most of them are single meals on the thing. They talk about the rollout of DLA or PIPs as it comes. I think disability organisations are talking about a 20% cut in DLA that will affect people with disability. There's huge difficulties and huge problems facing people in those most needing society. And I understand when you talk about the better education, better English, we all agree with that. But we also have a duty and obligation for those that are not only sitting in benefits at the minute, but those that are going to be directly affected by the welfare cuts that are coming down. One only needs to look at England and look at the disasters in working class communities that has happened through the introduction of welfare reform there. And what we're saying is that as a government, and certainly all the political parties need to stand up and defend that section of our population that's been forgot, and all of that. So there is major problems, but people continuously roll out the difficulties that not implementing welfare reform will have. But what they don't raise is the impact that it's going to have across it. Last week we talked about one of the problems in employment is the amount of people that are coming on as self-employed that are only getting 1 and 2 days working, that may rely on housing benefit that's going to be cut through welfare reform, or the over 25s that they're now talking about will be taken off housing benefit altogether. That's where the real problems are, and that's what we need to concentrate on.
Okay. That was probably more of a statement, Fra, than anything. But let me just say.
I'm trying to catch up with 3 or 4 other people said, including yourself.
Well, let me say a couple of things. First of all, what I've said today, in no shape or form, has been coordinated with anyone else in the room, including my party colleague Chris.
I haven't asked the question.
Absolutely. I'm actually trepidation as to what he's going to ask in a minute.
Shook his head, that I thought it was going to fall off his shoulders.
But obviously, I mean, parties here have very clearly articulated positions that have been rehearsed in the media over the past number of months. So, I mean, there's nothing's been said today that in any way is probably surprising. But let me just repeat, Fra. I mean, first of all, it's not for me to comment upon those NICFA figures. It's a DSD issue. But my understanding is that's about the projection of the rate of increase as opposed to a withdrawal of the amount of money out of Northern Ireland, and that's where that figure
billion over 4 years
where that's been generated. But let me say, I mean, I'll just reiterate the point. There are other ways in which we are helping vulnerable people in Northern Ireland, and those are in jeopardy. But let's remind ourselves. I mean, we have the Employment Service and the actions of our frontline staff in that regard. We've now awarded the contracts of the new Steps to Success programme. I appreciate not everyone is convinced of the approach we have taken in that regard, but the bottom line around that is to improve the performance of our ability of helping people who are long-term unemployed into work. We're investing in our disability employment strategy. We're, for the first time anywhere in these islands, developing an economic and activity strategy as an executive. And that comes on top of our training programmes where we're trying to work with young people and others about getting them the skills to engage in work. So a whole host of things that we are doing which is designed specifically to help vulnerable people to invest in skills and to gain the employability skills to engage in the workplace. And ultimately, the best way that we can help people who are vulnerable, where it is appropriate, is to facilitate them into work. And the vast majority of people who are out of work want to be in work for a whole host of reasons. And that's what ultimately what we're about. It's a balance. There's aspects of welfare reform that I personally do not support. I think virtually every party in this Assembly doesn't support. But that battle was fought in Westminster. And the financial reality is we are in a dependency situation around the subvention and support for our welfare provision in Northern Ireland. You may wish that to be otherwise, but the facts on the ground in terms of the financial flows suggest that is where we are, and that we have very, very little room for manoeuvre outside of that framework.
Okay. I think we've said all that needed to be said. I think that many of the meetings that we've had has been that there has been a discussion in and around the impact of welfare. From what I'm saying, and you talk, I've attended a couple of meetings, one by trade unions and one by others, who estimated that actually in total over £750 million will be withdrawn through the welfare reform. Well, our argument is that it will in fact affect those not only most needy in society, but those in low income who are already over 30% of the workforce, I believe, is low earners who rely on some element of welfare. If they're directly affected, they may have to leave work. So it's what is it called? It swings and roundabouts, you know, and we need to take that into consideration.
Yeah, the debate will continue.
Okay, members, thank you. Minister, thank you for your briefing on your outturn and your
Part
budget.
one.
Part one. I think members I suppose, necessarily strayed into the term ahead as well. Minister, thank you for facilitating the ongoing conversation. But I think moving on to our next briefing, members, which is the ministerial briefing on the term ahead. So, Minister, over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'll try to keep this short and maximise the time for questions. Just maybe highlight some of the major themes that we will be seeking to address over the coming months. I think the first thing I would stress, and maybe this reflects what is perhaps the biggest programme that we are working on at present, is around the review of youth training, and that is really how we can improve our post-16 offer for those who are leaving school at that stage. and you're familiar with the background to that, and there will be more detailed briefings over the course of the autumn in that regard. And at this stage, we're looking for a consultation going out probably late October, November, but we will ensure that the committee gets an advanced sight of the emerging recommendations before that is finalised. And again, that there'll be a statement to the Assembly in relation to the detail around that. I suppose in parallel with that, we have the United Youth Programme, which we have discussed already. Design is proceeding on that. There was a very useful workshop over the past weekend, and we would be hoping to have a number of pilots that will be taken forward during the course of this financial year, and indeed a budget has remained in place to facilitate that. In terms of the committee itself, there may well be quite a bit of work around employment law issues. Obviously, you're working through the consideration stage, or through the committee stage of the Work and Families Bill, and we look forward to your report in that regard. And of course, we'll give full consideration to any recommendations that the committee wishes to make in that regard. You know, the 0 hours contracts consultation is now almost concluded, and we will be considering the outcome of that with a view to joining that up with the employment law review as a whole. And maybe just at this stage, maybe just give some details as to what way we're going to proceed with the employment law, as we're about to table a paper to the executive. So without divulging the contents of that, but I will say how we're minded to proceed. We are looking to proceed on the issue of early conciliation and the routing of all claims through the LRA. We believe that is perhaps the most significant reform that we can address, and hopefully there is a consensus both politically and amongst stakeholders around that. And that basically will ensure that claims are exposed to the opportunities in relation to conciliation. We are also looking to legislate to enable us to provide for neutral assessment. There's not yet a consensus of how that should be done, but I think it's important that we at least have the powers in that regard. On the issue of unfair dismissal, there's not a political consensus as to how that can be taken forward, and indeed the evidence base for change is still a not yet proven situation. That, however, can be taken forward through secondary legislation, so we have the option of moving ahead with that as and when the circumstances are right, outside the context of the primary legislation. The one thing we do want to do is do a small bit of tidy up in relation to the secondary legislation around unfair dismissal, where at this stage that is proceeded through a confirmatory resolution as opposed to affirmative resolution. And what the difference is that in the context where I as a minister take a decision, the law changes and then it has to be confirmed by the Assembly after a number of months. There's a danger that a minister, whether it's me or of a different political party, could take a decision that is not likely to find favour with the Assembly, and that we could have chaos in the system. So it's important that we ensure that any change around unfair dismissal happens through affirmative resolution, which means it doesn't come into force until the Assembly itself takes that decision. So that's a very small tweak around the secondary legislation, but that issue remains a live issue, but it's one we don't necessarily need to proceed with through the primary legislation that we have to get cleared through the executive. We're also seeking to change the qualification period for collective redundancies of over 100, which is currently at 90 days, and Northern Ireland's an outlier in that respect, and we're proposing to bring that down to 45 days. And also to remove the consideration of term contracts from that, which is viewed as being an exercise in gold plating. And also we're looking to modify the law around whistleblowing and introduce a public interest test as opposed to a good faith test, which again should make it easier for people to engage in whistleblowing. I appreciate that was a very quick run through. I just wanted to share with the committee at this stage my thinking on the issue. And that's not to deprive the committee of a formal briefing around those issues, which will be provided as part of your agenda. So that's not the ticking a box and getting that off the chest. That will be discussed with you in greater detail. We'll be hoping to get clearance from the executive this autumn and have an employment bill before the Assembly around springtime 2015, which, subject to this Assembly being in place, will proceed through to the end of the term and be hopefully passed by the Assembly in early 2016. You'll also be aware of economic activity, which has been mentioned, and again, we're hoping to have a strategy to the Executive round about November in that respect. And again, the careers review will be reporting at the end of October, early November. And again, I understand that the chair of the panel is going to come and speak to the committee in a few weeks' time, and no doubt you'll want to reflect to him your own views on the way forward in that regard, building upon the report that has been commissioned. And finally, on teacher training, I think Fra mentioned that, but we are meeting over the coming weeks with the different ITE providers to seek their responses to the report that was provided by the Salberg panel at the end of June, beginning of July. And I know the committee themselves are seeking to engage with the providers. And again, we can have a more detailed discussion during the course of the autumn as to what is the emergent consensus or the divergent views on the way forward. And again, we're happy to answer questions either on those particular points or indeed anything people wish to raise with us today, and we'll endeavour to answer as best we can.
Minister, just steps to success?
Steps to success is contracts are awarded and they're going live, I believe, on the 1st of October.
We're moving to implementation, going through a pre-implementation phase, so we're going live with that. And I think the committee is going to meet the providers, of course, over the coming weeks. So you'll hear at first hand their plans.
Have you any idea yet of supply chain establishment? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a list of the supply chain which we can provide to the committee, which I think we did release at the end of a few weeks ago. We will ensure that's provided for your next meeting, the list of the organisations that have been part of the supply chain for each of the three lead contractors. We can provide that information.
I suppose, Minister, I haven't heard your term ahead. The one thing that the committee started on, where we will be focusing on, will be our own inquiry into provision of post-19 SEN.
Yes.
It was one of the things we raised on our away day, was, with pressures on budgets, how we most make use of what we do, that there is a finite budget out there, and I suppose, but the careers inquiry, how we make best use of what's already out there. Yeah. So would be your thoughts on that as well, would be?
Okay, well, let me answer that and give what is perhaps a realistic assessment in that regard. But first of all, we're doing our own piece of work, which I apologise I should have mentioned, around a disability employment strategy. That's a very narrower, much more narrow intervention. We're finalising a consultation, which again should go out in during the course of the autumn, and we'll give you an advanced briefing ahead of time in relation to that piece of work. I've still to receive the report from officials on that to sign that one off. The learning disability transitions issue is a wider issue. Obviously, it's a cross-cutting matter. This has been raised has been dealt with through an executive subcommittee, and DEL is coordinating activities around that issue. The inquiry that the committee are conducting is certainly something we welcome as a department and should complement very much the work that is being done. The difficulty we have at this stage is around, again, additional resources, and there is an issue about gaps in provision, which is really the nub of the issue. There's things that DEL can do which are clearly interventions for DEL. There are things that health should do which are clearly interventions for them. There's things that lie in the middle where officials from different departments are doing a gaps analysis and seeing what type of proposals we can bring forward to fill those gaps. The difficulty is they will probably require additional resources. It's not just a case of doing things smarter. To meet those, there may well be things that simply aren't being done that we need to invest in. For example, provision of transport is a clear example there. Now, I don't want to say that just because we're in a difficult financial situation that's off the table, because sometimes even in a difficult financial situation you'll take a decision that certain things are so important that you will seek to invest in those, even at the price of actually having to cut more elsewhere. So I will look at that type of issue with that type of spirit, though the difficulty of doing it is so much more accentuated given the situation that we're in. That's hopefully a realistic assessment as to where we stand on that.
I think that's where the committee wanted to be as well, that we weren't going to build up hopes for the sake of building up hopes for our committee report, so we'll be very much relying on working with the support of the department to make sure we come up with something that's realistic and achievable. Pat?
Yeah, I'm very keen to see the disability and employment strategy coming through with reference on the most vulnerable, whether they be physical disability or learning disability. Two other areas that the committee have invested a huge volume of time in. One was NEETs. For example, I know the department have a unit now in NEETs unit. I'm still very keen to see how that's progressing and the collaboration with our departments is going, because it's fundamental to ensuring those most vulnerable are getting the attention that's required. The other one will be very brief, Chair. In terms of the careers, which this committee invests a lot of time in, there's an ongoing review by yourself and DE. And you yourself wanted to give us an assurance there would be the most structured and comprehensive review of that. But I don't see any call for submissions from interested parties in relation to this review, nor do I see. It was indicated that the most vulnerable, there would be consultation or engagement with them. For example, young people in care, young people in juvenile detention. And I'm just concerned on that. If we're going to make a difference, then we need to get to the hub of the issues in terms of careers.
Well, first of all, I mean, hopefully we'll have that disability employment strategy before the committee as soon as we possibly can. On the issue of NEETs, obviously we have the Pathways to Success strategy that has been rolled out. Our funding for the different projects expires in March 2015, and that is to be superseded by the United Youth Programme, which isn't a like-for-like replacement of the NEETs strategy. It is a wholly different concept, but it will subsume NEETs amongst some other types of interventions, just to clarify that point. We are going to have to secure the funding for United Youth in terms of future budgets, and again, that is going to be a huge challenge in terms of the current situation. But it is something that is viewed as being of strategic importance by not just this department, but by the executive as a whole. In terms of the approach we've taken to careers, it's for the panel themselves to determine how they're operating. But I think the answer to your question, Pat, is that they are seeking to build upon the work of the committee. As part of their terms of reference, they're being asked to build on the work of the committee. They're not going back to the first principles, and the committee have done an extraordinary amount of work in that regard. And for us to simply go out and repeat that exercise, I think is probably going to waste the time with the stakeholders, and frankly is disrespecting the committee, who've actually done a very professional job in terms of accumulating all of that advice. Brian Ambrose will probably relate to himself that whenever he took over, he was presented with a pile of papers that probably was about that high on his desk, and he's probably spent his summer working through it all. A large element of that was the work that was commissioned by the committee. They are, however, engaging in some direct engagement with a number of target groups, which includes engaging with young people and businesses and those who are vulnerable. So that's part of their modus operandi. So they haven't done a full consultation or call for submissions, but there is a targeted engagement with key stakeholders to ensure what they're doing is right. I'm hearing some positive feedback that the process is working well.
No, I look forward to it, but you know, if I can recall your own comments at that particular time and a substantial and structured engagement with stakeholders, I don't think that has taken place by the joint review, and I would certainly encourage and appeal the department to look at that again to make sure that we're not missing out on a trick or an opportunity in front of you.
Okay. Thanks, Pat. Well.
Thanks, Robin, and good to get more questions here. I attended the launch of a report by NICFA yesterday on the introduction of a living wage. Is that something that you're keen to explore in any way in the coming term?
I'm keen to see where companies themselves would want to do this. I think we need to be very mindful of ensuring we're adopting a balanced approach to exactly how we take this forward. I think where companies voluntarily wish to move in that direction, that's good. If we want to make something like that mandatory, there's a danger it could be very counterproductive and actually drive people out of employment back into unemployment, or remove opportunities for young people to engage in training and gaining valuable experience. It's important that members are aware that often a lot of our projects and schemes work on a very marginal call for employers around incentives. And we use, for example, subsidies as part of the youth employment scheme. We are considering subsidies as part of the economic and activity strategy. So particularly for small businesses, there are a lot of marginal calls that have to be made around the how many staff they will take on. Ultimately, the best way of driving up wages is through improving the productivity within the economy, and investing in skills will transform the profile of our economy over the years and decades to come. That is the best way of sustaining this, rather than necessarily government legislating to artificially set a minimum wage. Or a living wage which is significant in advance of the minimum wage. That said, I mean, it's a UK-wide issue. There is a view that the level of the minimum wage may well be worthy of being increased across the UK as a whole, and again, that's something I'm very open to seeing happen. I think there would be a view that it is maybe lower than it needs to be.
So you want to see the minimum wage increased? To what level then would you like to see it increased?
Well, I mean, we have a low pay commission that gives advice to government in that regard, and that's why they're there to give advice.
But he'll not give advice to you, he'll give it to Vince Cable or something.
Yeah, and I mean, again,
So you should be allowed an opinion?
I'm allowed an opinion, but I also have,
sure.
I also have to respect my limitations in terms of knowing what we are qualified to give opinions on, and we have to ensure that what comes forward is sustainable.
But do you think that the minimum wage somebody should be paid is enough to earn a decent standard of living?
I'm sure that for many people, the wages that they are on are very challenging for them. But what we are about as an executive as a whole, and as a department, is helping people to get into work and to sustain work. And there are a host of factors and levers that are involved in that process that we need to be mindful of. The level of wages that are set is one aspect of that.
Well, can I give you two suggestions of things you could do without introducing a statutory or mandatory living wage? The first one is that you engage with the Living Wage Foundation and try and encourage more companies here to voluntarily agree to pay a living wage. And the second one is that through the Assured Skills programme, that any subsidies or grants you hand out to large employers, any large employer that wants to benefit from assured skills, that those jobs have to be paid at a rate no less than the living wage. So there's two things that you can consider doing from it.
Well, certainly we're happy to engage in and around the first issue in the context of comments I've made earlier on. With respect to our assured skills, I mean, I don't think we need to go in and make that a condition, because the reality is that our assured skills interventions happen in relation to jobs that are coming in that are increasingly of a higher paid nature. For example, there are jobs that are supported through the InvestNI Jobs Fund that Assured Skills doesn't usually complement. Even those jobs that are supported through the Jobs Fund are in advance of what the living wage would be paying in any event. But you're looking at some of the programmes that Assured Skills have been supporting recently. I mean, the average salary, for example, of the jobs that were announced yesterday in relation to Deloitte are 30,000 plus. So, I mean, we're talking here of us attracting and supporting very well-paid jobs at present.
Okay. And in terms of the discussions on employment law, how is the working group with employers and trade unions progressing on trying to find consensus?
Well, that's been very beneficial to us, and I mean, that has allowed us to build consensus around a number of the reforms. There's more work that has to be done in that regard. I mean, for example, there's issues which I don't propose to get into today around, for example, the evolution of TUPE that need to be discussed more detail with the key social partners. I should also say as well that we're out with the formal primary legislation. There's also a piece of work going on around the review of tribunal rules, where there will be a consultation. Those will largely be addressed through secondary legislation, but again, that's part of the wider equation of making the system more efficient and effective. I am conscious of trying to ensure that what happens in Northern Ireland has the support of key stakeholders and also political support as well.
And finally, in terms of barriers to mobility across the border at undergraduate level, are you hopeful of making any further progress this year on that issue?
I am realistic about that at this stage. We are making slow progress in that regard. A working group has been established between the two departments to scope out a whole range of issues to see how we can address barriers. But this is an issue that's not moving as fast as I would like to see it moving. And the issue of pace is not one that lies in my hand. It's more a reflection of how quickly our counterparts in the south are moving on the issue.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
Stephen?
Chris?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister, for your update so far. I think everybody has concerns about the impact of welfare reform, and everybody's working in their own way to try and mitigate those. Maybe the disagreement is how exactly we achieve that, but I think the committee will want to hear more about the disability employment strategy, the needs strategy, work being done with Hydebank Secure Training College, and indeed the United Youth Programme in the term going forward. But obviously key to get people out of unemployment into work, to increase productivity, to get higher wages, to grow the economy is improving skills. So could you maybe give us a bit more of an update in relation to the work that you have done to improve skills relevant to industry needs in relation to the pilot Welding Academy launched in connection with BMC and Harland Wolff, and maybe some update around the work being done with regards to the software professional course as well?
Yeah. Well, thanks for those, and stress that none of that was planted, by the way. Thought all by itself.
I'm not fortunate enough to get any briefing, so I have to do the work myself.
Tell us about the good work you've done now.
If only it was.
On a roll there.
First of all, looking at this strategically, I mean, we have a skills strategy for Northern Ireland, and that identifies that in order for Northern Ireland to be truly competitive, we need to see a transformation of our skills over the course of the decade. That means meeting our targets around level 2, level 3, level 4 plus skills within the working age population. And we're making steady progress in that regard. We have a particular need to address and invest in STEM around all of that. In terms of the interventions we make, it's useful to separate those into two different types of interventions. The first is the structural interventions. Now, those are things such as improvement to careers advice, the provision of additional undergraduate places, particularly in economically relevant subjects, the PhDs, the new apprenticeship strategy. That's all about getting it right at first principles when people are on a smooth platform or journey. There are, however, things we have to do which are interventions that are more of a corrective nature, and a lot of the things we do around the academies and the software professionals courses are about investing in people who have a very good level of skill to begin with, but ensuring that they have the very particular skills that are required by businesses. But hopefully, as time progresses, the need for that type of intervention will decrease because the mainstream systems interventions will be meeting those requirements. The Harland Wolff scheme is now live, and I think they are actively seeking to recruit as of the beginning of this month for that. Again, it is a bit of speculative training on our part, so we will see how that goes. So the indications to date are promising. Software professionals, again, is one of the examples of the work we're doing in the back of the ICT working group around a number of different interventions to meet the needs of the flourishing IT industry in Northern Ireland. And that takes people who are graduates in other areas and gives them the ability over a very short period of time to engage in and be employable within IT. And again, our further education colleges have been a key delivery partner in all of those, which again is a clear example of the importance of the FE sector and being a key plank of our economic support.
Okay, members. Minister, thank you very much for taking the time and coming along this morning and again engaging with the committee and Shobin and Frank forum as well.
And I'm happy that Fiona and Cathy can liaise, just make any further modifications to the work programme just to reflect any of the issues I've mentioned today you want to pick up in more detail or not yet fully programmed. And I'm again happy to come back to the committee in a few months' time. We can do a further assessment as to where things stand. And again, you'll be formally notified in the usual ways around the October monitoring round. If the situation changes radically from what has been presented today, we're happy to come back and directly myself explain any further adjustments that we have to make to the budget in light of any further cuts or asked of us in here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Derek, Heather, Stephen, thank you very much. Everyone. Okay, members, moving on then to next agenda item 9, Working Families Bill. Is a briefing from the Engineering Employers Federation.
I might take it to you, maybe.
I just welcome Michelle McGinley, employment lawyer, and Catherine McCormick, employment lawyer first. Members, this will be recorded for Hansard because it is part of our briefing on the bill. At page 377 of your pack is the Employers Federation submission to the committee, and at page 379 is the Employment Federation submission to the Department consultation. Michelle, Catherine, you are very welcome. Over to yourselves.
Very much appreciate the opportunity to attend here today and have some input into this process. I'd like to apologise firstly for the absence of our director, Peter Block. Unfortunately, he's engaged in a tribunal hearing this afternoon, so was unable to attend. Perhaps if I could start off by just giving a bit of a background to me and Catherine and the Engineering Employers Federation, as many of the committee here might not be aware of us. I'm an employment lawyer, have been so for over 15 years. I don't want to be too specific on the length of time, and I've specialised at all times of advising employers. I've never advised, employees. Catherine joined ourselves in 2009, and again, when she was qualified at that stage, and has worked predominantly in advising employers. In terms of the EEF, it is a bit of a misnomer. We're the Engineering Employers Federation. Perhaps we're more aptly the Employers Federation, because the range of industries we have spans across a number of sectors. We've got aerospace, technology, call centres, charities, food, so we're quite a big organisation. Our current membership stands at about 137 companies, and again, we're a not-for-profit organisation, so the way we operate is that you pay a membership fee, and it provides employment law advice and representation at the tribunal, regardless of your size. So we have some very big members of over 1,000 employees to some very small members of 10 and under, and they all get the same service. And it's based on a membership fee, which is based on a salary bill. So it's it's a fair reflection of the fee that they should pay. So that's the EEF and ourselves. Before I go on and look at the work and family bills, perhaps I could just note the disappointment of our members in terms of employment law in Northern Ireland. We had the employment law review process, which I've heard the Minister speak of this morning. There's a real disappointment that hasn't been taken forward by now. I think we've been given timelines of the spring this year, the end of this year, and now it looks like it's the spring next year. Those are changes that, in our members' view, would be more helpful to improving and growing in the recession, or coming out of the recession. And we're really disappointed that things like shared parental leave, working time regulations, and extension to flexible working, we seem to be tinkering around with real changes that could make real differences to business, although they're commendable on their own. I think we would like to have seen the employment law reviewed, been taken in preference to the shared parental leave provisions. And then, if I just explain then, if I go on now and look at the work and family bill, you have our input into the consultation process back in 2013 and our comments to the committee as well in June this year. Again, and this hopefully is taken to be constructive and not too critical, but I think you would have got a more structured and effective response to that call for evidence in June had there been questions asked to the people that were targeted. I think an open question on a very legalistic bill wasn't particularly helpful for those attempting to respond to it and give you the information that you were actually looking for us to achieve. And again, coming here today as well, if we had to have a wee bit more direction on key areas or key themes that were of interest to your members, I think we might have been more effective in our communication to you. And hopefully that's seen as constructive and not too critical, but it's just going forward in future. I think if questions were asked, you might get more meaningful responses. But in terms of the the concerns about the bill, the first thing I'd say is that we commend the ethos of the bill. You know, trying to retain more females in the workplace is to be commended. Businesses like that, it means that they get the best person from the widest possible pool, and that is something to be commended, and I think all businesses would say that that's a good thing. It's also best to ensure a better work-life balance. If your employees are happy in the workplace, they work more effectively, and business again are all for that, to make a happy employee who will be more productive in the workplace. A question, though, whether this will be effective through the provision of shared parental leave. We all know that the uptake of additional paternity leave was extremely low. I think in GB figures it was less than 1%. There's speculation and there's a real concern that this sharing of parental leave won't achieve that aim of what we're trying to do. It might start a culture change, which may be what the committee's attempting to achieve, but the projections for the uptake of shared parental leave are given very low. I think it's between 3 and 5%. They're expected fathers to take it up. So I'm not sure if all this changes that we're about to engage in will actually achieve the aim that we're setting out for. One of my other preliminary points before I look at the provisions of the bill is a question of timing. I'm not sure where the committee sees this being implemented. I know in GB, and it seems from the department's response that we're going to be following in the footsteps of GB of how this right will be brought into effect. And GB are suggesting that it will apply for births due on or after the 5th of April. If we're working to that timescale, it gives very little time for employers to prepare, to plan, to train, to put policies in places. I think the Work and Family Bill is up for royal assent in January this year. Regulations will only come after that because the Work and Family Bill paves the way for the regulations. And employers need to know. They need to know what the changes are, what is coming into place before they can make the changes to the policies. If we're looking at an implementation date of April, that's extremely tight, if not impossible, for most employers to make changes. There's also, from the employee's perspective, if we're looking at a deadline of April again, there's some pre-birth rights in the Work and Family Bill, such as attending antenatal appointments and indeed early births. Realistically, people giving birth in January could have access to these rights if their due date was on or after the 5th of April. So I think the committee might need to look realistically, when should this be brought in? If we're going to follow in the footsteps of GB, which it seems from the department responsible will, when should we in Northern Ireland bring it in? There is some suggestion that regulations should be in place for some, and we've been working with our counterparts in GB on this. Their view is that the regulations should be in place for at least 7 months before they will apply to births. So if you're looking at February, you might be looking at September or October implementation date for the expected week of childbirth, you know, when the rights will actually crystallise. So whatever decisions the committee makes, what I would urge you is that you give enough notifications to employers to make the changes so that they can comply with these new laws and they're not on the back foot in comparison to their counterparts in GB, who already have final regulations, they have draft regulations, and I understand that ACAS is actually drafting a guide at the minute on what these new rights will mean. At the minute we're in the back foot, and it'll be unfair on employers to catch up too quickly, or to be expected to catch up too quickly. So those are my preliminary comments in terms of the bill. I think the concerns from employers, and it's not going to come as any surprise to the committee, fall into two strands. The first strand is the administrative burden of the bill, or the provisions, and the second strand is the difficulties in finding a replacement or cover to cover the periods of leave. And if I could divide my comments mainly into those two concerns, because those are the key areas that employers are concerned about. I note in the second reading of the bill, the Minister had said that the cost will not be any more than what employers would have paid out in terms of maternity pay, so it will be cost neutral in that sense. I think that ignores the administration element of these new rights. The department has always, as well, said that it's going to, try and alleviate the administrative burden of the bill to, or minimise it to an extent. We've no idea yet how they propose to do that. If you look at Northern Ireland, and we all know that it's predominantly made up of small and medium-sized businesses, with no dedicated HR function, to expect someone to get to grips with the new rights the eligibility criteria, which from an employment lawyer's perspective is difficult to get your head around, the notification requirements, the ability to make requests to change, which requests will be counted, which will be null and void, so they're back to the 3 requests. It's very, very difficult to understand. So if you're looking at the administrative burden of it, I think one of the key things that you need to look at is simplifying it into guidance. And I don't think it's right to provide a guidance book of 40 pages and expect your small business with no dedicated HR to grapple with that. I think what you need to look at is at-a-glance guides, simple headliners, signposting to perhaps more detailed guidance notes on if they need to know more, rather than giving them a guide and say, here's what you need to know about shared parental leave and what you need to do. You might want to develop policies, sample policies for them to put into place in the workplace. You also might want to develop model documents, and I know GB are looking at that in terms of the intent, the notification, the eligibility documents, the request to change, all those documents. I think if the committee were to be looking at and recommending that there were model documents put in place, that would go some way to alleviate the administrative burden. We agree, and our members agree as well, with the consensus that seems to be that this should be as light a touch as possible. We don't want to be regulated too much on how we deal with requests, but if these are sample documents that can be used rather than compulsory documents, I think that's a preferable way to go in Northern Ireland. The other, as I said at the start, it's an extremely complicated piece of legislation to understand what type of requests count, when they can change, how I recalculate how much leave that person has, because it's all based on the reciprocal employer and the reciprocal employee, what leave they take, what pay they take. There's the administrative burden of between 2 employers as well, of keeping tabs on who's taking what and who's now entitled to what. So if they can do anything along the lines of online toolkits where you can just type in, this is Joe Bloggs, he's got 26 weeks, he's got X, he earns X amount, he has done in the last 66 weeks. Some of the things that takes away those sort of decision-making process from the employer, that they can go online and type in criteria and it tells them your employee is entitled to X amount of leave and X amount of pay. Something like that would be extremely helpful for all businesses. It also may be extremely helpful for employees, because this right's very much based on the employee knowing what they're entitled to and asking the employer for those entitlements. If they get it wrong, which Catherine will come on to, the whole thing could fall apart. The other thing, and I know this is probably not realistic given what we've just heard about the budget and constraints in finance, but you might decide that to have a dedicated helpline in the infancy of these rights going live, so that employers can phone up and understand how they navigate, the requests and the shared parental leave. Maybe something that the LRA can do. They offer very good advice or information system. They're very fond of not advising but providing information. But it might be something worthwhile doing, that your small employer can phone up and ask for advice. As I say, many of our members, that doesn't always come into the fore because they have our service and we can advise them. But it's getting this right for all businesses in Northern Ireland. In terms of the cost as well, in terms of the administrative burden, there's an awful cost of the time spent taken in deciding if someone's eligible and considering the request. And the way, as I understand it, the provisions may operate in GB, and I have to confess I'm not an expert on this, I'm still getting to know it, but is that if they put in a request, they can withdraw for a discontinuous period of leave, so chunking it up into 3 different periods. They can withdraw it even though the company might have considered it and agreed it, and say that won't count as a request. So there's an awful lot of waste of time that could be involved in considering requests that the employee then withdraw. Understandably, perhaps because the reciprocal employer hasn't agreed their request or their partner's request, so the request they're asking makes no sense to them now. But it comes back to, this is an administrative burden that's been placed on the employer already. We've already taken time considering your request, looking into your replacement, and now we're back to you've got your 3 tickets and your 3 requests. So there's those difficulties as well, which sort of brings me into the next key area for employers and the key concern, which is arranging cover and a replacement. This is all based on people being able to take time away from the workplace to care for the child, which is a great thing. But you've got to look at it too from the employer's perspective. If I have an employee who's telling me, I'll be in for 6 weeks, I'll be out for another 4 weeks, I might come in for 3 weeks, and then I might go out for 8 weeks. How are you going to plan your cover on that? And that's a real difficulty for an employer. And, you know, there is a need, it seems to be that the way we will go forward is to give some flexibility to parents to choose when to take their leave. But I think it's probably loaded in favour at the minute of the employee rather than the business who may have difficulties getting a replacement who's suitably trained and's got the suitable skills to cover that specific period. And if we take an example of, and I know my counterparts have used this example to buzz, is a finance director who puts in a request for shared parental leave coming up to the end of the tax year. If it's one, you know, as I understand it, if it's a request for a continuous block of 6 weeks that falls over April, the employer has absolutely no ability to say no to that. They're not going to get a replacement in that will know the business and be able to bring it to the end of the tax year, and that will create a huge difficulty to employers. So I think the only way I think around the difficulties covered by arranging cover and replacement is to think about giving some more certainty to how much leave and when it's going to be taken at an earlier stage. So maybe perhaps not following the footsteps of GB of allowing them to have 8 weeks notice of any single chunk of leave that they want to take, where the employer just have 8 weeks and has no ability to refuse it, but to think of what can we do here in Northern Ireland that might be more tailored to our small and medium-sized businesses. Because an absence of one person can create a huge struggle for any business. So if you can put an obligation on the employee to declare if they're taking shared parental leave at an early stage, and how and when they're proposing to do it, and make that a binding notification at an earlier stage, that will go a great way of helping the employer plan then for the cover that they need. Otherwise, if we operate like GB, all the employer will have is 8 weeks notice of any intended period of which they take. If the employee wants to be clever, they'll put an 8 weeks notice for 6 weeks, another 8 weeks notice for another 3 weeks, for example, and all these periods under the GB provisions can't be refused. One of the other things that you might want to consider is an ability for an employer to say no to the leave at times that doesn't suit them. You know, in the same way as we do for parental leave and for holidays, we can say no to a holiday request, but we can't deny them the holiday. We must allow them to take it at some point in the future within a reasonable period. And if an employer was given an ability to veto a period of leave that was unsuitable, then again that might help them, help the businesses in Northern Ireland. As well as that, and I know Dale has indicated that the time period for considering requests will be 14 days. That's extremely tight, you know, again, for small and medium-sized business, and we would urge some extension to that period. We had asked for 28 days, maybe a 21-day period as a compromise. So those in terms of our biggest concerns from employers on the shared parental leave are really fall into those two strands, the administrative burden and the difficulties in finding a replacement, and of course the cost of a replacement as well, which can be higher than your permanent employee by the time you pay your recruitment agency fees or you've gone out to try and attempt it. I could pass you over to my colleague Catherine. She's going to talk about other issues under the bill, such as what happens when we've got it wrong, we've given the wrong leave.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, as Michelle already stated, a concern for the Engineering Employers Federation and also our members is what happens when they get, you know, the members of the employer or the employee actually gets this wrong. Whilst on the face of it, these rights seem, you know, the general right that you can share your shared parental leave or maternity leave, the finer details are very complicated, as Michelle raised. What happens when you ask for a period of leave and you withdraw it and you put numerous requests in thereafter? The exercising of these rights are dependent on the employee knowing their entitlements, knowing the right, you know, the time off that they wish to take, and being accurate in the information that they're providing to the employer. These rights are therefore dependent on potentially two sets of employees, and two employees and two employers, and the information between those parties obviously being accurate, and if there are further changes, then they're being notified. because you will have a difficulty in obviously tracking periods of leave, but also tracking periods of pay. And there is concern from our members and from employers that what happens when you overpay someone's entitlement to shared parental leave? Who's going to take that loss? Is that going to be a cost borne by the employer, or are there going to be penalties for perhaps overpaying or recouping back? We understand that BIS and GB have gave a commitment that there will not be any recoupment of excess payments in addition over the statutory entitlements, and therefore that's something that we would also be keen for employers here in Northern Ireland. As Michelle also stated, because these rights will be quite complicated in that you can effectively chop and change periods of leave to be in and out of the business or in and out of employment, and another employee, your partner, will also then be sharing that period of leave. At-a-glance guides and signposting in terms of rights and entitlements and eligibility are extremely important, or a way online that employers can track an employee's entitlement and either to leave or to pay, and that's something that we would obviously encourage the committee to look at. Something that we also then would ask for in terms of the regulations is that whilst there is a responsibility and there is a burden that employers will need to rely on the information that is provided by the employee and need to rely on that information to be correct, there doesn't appear then that there's any obligation on the employer, compulsory requirement for the employee to provide information about or consent to contact the other employer, and therefore we would ask that if the employee does not provide consent to contact their partner's employer, then in those circumstances, because of the inability to confirm or verify the periods of leave or pay, that employers are entitled to refuse then any period of leave that's requested. Finally then, some of the issues that I want to raise is in terms of discrimination. Some employers in Northern Ireland and some of our members offer enhanced maternity pay or contractual maternity pay for women taking maternity leave. There is a concern that this new scheme will give rise to claims of discrimination or sex discrimination if employers don't choose to offer enhanced contractual pay for shared parental leave. Whilst there has been, guidance in the past, and I believe a recent case in England which said, there will be no there is no sex discrimination if you fail to offer enhanced paternity leave or from the additional paternity leave regulations. We would ask that there's some clear guidance from the department or from the committee that if employers choose to continue with any enhanced maternity pay schemes, that they won't be penalised or that they're protected in terms of claims for sex discrimination from male counterparts who are wishing to avail of the shared parental leave scheme but obviously not receive enhanced shared parental pay. I just pass you back then to Michelle, who will obviously summarise our concerns.
The only other point in discrimination point is that if there's not some clear indication from the department that it won't be considered to be discrimination not to enhance shared parental leave to similar provisions as enhanced maternity pay, then what you might have with employers is starting to phase out enhanced maternity schemes, which isn't really what any of us wants to see. So it's one of the things that they are concerned about, and some employers are thinking about, should we continue our enhancements for new employees coming in, or is that something we should phase out going forward? So it is a real concern for members. I think, unless the committee has any questions, particular questions.
I suppose, Michelle, maybe come back to your earlier statement where you were concerned about insulting the committee or stating our case. What I would say to you, when we asked for submissions of evidence on this bill, it is from stakeholders who have already consulted either with the department or with ourselves. We do not send out formal questions at this stage from stakeholders to reply specific from. This is the opportunity for the stakeholder to come in front of the committee, so we can take on your concerns rather than place specific concerns that we have in writing, because as I'm sure you're aware, we're a cross-party scrutiny committee, so we don't actually have, so maybe you're unaware of that, maybe just the relationship of why we were coming here at the start, so it was just really to clear that up for you.
Yeah, but it's probably from our perspective, if we were given key themes that came out of the public consultation that the committee was looking at, that these are the key areas, whilst not asking questions, but just to direct us in terms of areas, that would have been much helpful.
But that's not how the system works. This is for you to come from the public
unfortunate,
consultation.
as I think the responses you received in June showed, you didn't really get, meaty responses from that consultation.
Neither did the department.
And, well,
Because that's the stakeholders we engaged with. But without that, we've heard some of your concerns coming forward here, representing your membership. In regards to the timeline, if there is a delay in timeline and implementation here compared to the GB legislation, is there a potential for discrimination then as well, that we're actually delaying, saying there could be multiple employers employing people in GB aren't here?
I don't think there'd be legal discrimination claims. Some employees or some females who have a due date of 5th of April, obviously we may say it, and some fathers whose partners have a due date of 5th of April, and that's like not knowing this applies to adoption, etc. as well. Obviously they're going to be disadvantaged as they won't have the benefit of it. But if we're looking at a bill that's going to be passed in January, you're only going to give yourself a three-month window to get regulations. As I understand it, there's 5 sets of regulations in GB at the present, and they're still drilling down on the details of those and making sure there's no inconsistencies and drafting guidance. That leaves a very short period, not only for you to pass the legislation, but once that legislation is passed, for employers and employees to understand it. So I can't see discrimination cases in the legal sense per se, but there will be,
Inequalities. I suppose one of the things in regards to regulations and something the committee has got assurance on, that there will be some of the regulations coming forward will actually be affirmative, so they have to be passed as well. And I just see department officials looking at, because they are following up behind you here, so they'll be able to hear some of your concerns here. And well, we can get clarity on that. Pat?
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, you're very welcome. Interesting presentation, because it puts in perspective the difficulties that are experienced by employers.
Yeah.
I have to say honestly, I thought this was just a general tidy up exercise to give equality to employees.
Yes.
That's going to take place, in terms of maternity and paternity and some other elements. But have you had any discussions, as well as your formal submission you made, had you any discussions with officials regarding some of the ideas and suggestions you've had?
We have consulted with Dell on the employment law review. We've had a number of meetings with them. We haven't, I don't believe we've had a meeting with them directly on the Work and Families Bill. We put in a quite detailed response in 2012, or is it 2013? 2013 to the sharing of parental leave and the way forward as part of that consultation.
Some other question before I ask it. Your organisation, and I take your point, it's not just engineering, it's a multitude of employers. Membership of that, what type of membership do you have?
In the sense of?
Statistically, is it 200, is it 500?
137 companies we have currently.
137 companies.
Yeah. And they range from several thousand, quite a number of the bigger employers in Northern Ireland, right down to the smaller employers. I think we're probably more bigger than we are smaller.
So they would pay a fee to have membership of it. As a result of that fee of membership, they can have the information.
Unlimited access to.
And legal.
And legal representation in the tribunal as well.
So what would happen for a non-affiliated small company to approach you? What would you say to them?
It's a not-for-profit organisation, so all members.
No, but a non-member. Say a small company.
Well, any small company can approach us. We probably would assist if we can, and if they wanted to become members, then we would give them details of the membership as well. As I say, it's not for profit. We have our own committee and president and chairman, so that's it's really to provide a service to all employers, which is an equal service in terms of the service. It just goes on the salary bill. Whatever wages bill they have, it's a percentage of that. So it's fair and equitable across the board.
I think one of the fundamental issues both of you raised was this administrative burden that's going to take place in the very small companies. I think,
yes,
as the chair has outlined, hopefully the department officials will be able to give us some help on that. The two ideas you tabled, they make common sense, an online toolkit. a dedicated helpline. It's common sense, one would imagine. So, while I'm agreeing with you, I'm hoping the officials might help us.
It's a question of finance, really, and I understand
Does it
that.
happen in other places when you have this type of legislation taking place, that the implementation of it, the awareness of it, the education of it, there's a lead-in time?
Indeed.
And is there helplines in other places?
There is helplines. For example, the ICO, the Information Commission Officer, will answer questions on whistleblowing. The Labour Relations Agency, which we highly rate in the organisation, they do a great service. They can't advise, but they will give information to the smaller members as well. I know the Federation of Small Businesses tries to do something, and I'm not sure what CBI does in terms of information and advice, but these rights are extremely complicated. I find it difficult getting my head around the eligibility, the notification, the requests, and how they interact with each other. We're still coming up with questions that we have no answers to.
You really think it was common sense?
It's not. It sounds, the headliners, 3 requests, it all sounds very simple, but when you get down to the detail, it's a bit of a nightmare at the minute.
Thank you.
Okay, Phil.
Thanks, Robin, and thanks for your presentation. It's very useful. I acknowledge that this will produce some problems for employers of all sizes, but particularly for micro businesses and small employers. And I think we need to be aware of that when we're passing legislation, and we'll have such a change. But I think it's only right that we move the laws on to afford equality to both people that want maternity and paternity leave. But I do think it needs to be done in a way that's mindful of the impact it will have on employers. And I do think some of the solutions or suggestions you've given us are straightforward enough. I don't think there's enough places for employers to go to access help and support and guidance. And it's usually too late. The problem's already started by the time that they have somewhere to go. So I would completely agree with a proposal of that nature. But in terms of the timelines, I know that's something that seems to be of great interest to you. And me and Pat sitting here looking at all these questions you're going to ask, and I said to Pat, would it not have made more sense to have the department officials coming first? And then Pat said, no, have them coming after them, and then they can answer all these questions.
That's true.
So you've raised a number of questions here. We are going to go through the bill in a detailed way, and we'll take your comments on board, I suppose. But you have identified a number of problems. To be honest, we'd rather solutions.
Yeah.
So can you,
Certainty.
for all of the problems you've identified, I don't want to go through them all again, can you come back to us with solutions of something that you think is workable, that will allow people to have more flexibility but also meet the needs of your members?
We can come back. I don't know if you want me to come back in writing, but there are some suggestions how we can deviate from the GB position, but give more certainty to smaller employers about if the person is going to avail of the option of taking shared parental leave. That's the first tick, and then how it's going to be divvied up between her and her partner, or it might be a her, but between the partner and the other partner, how that will be divvied up. If certainty can be brought in at an earlier stage, that certainty will create an awful help, or be a greater help in terms of planning in a business and getting a replacement done and understanding where the gaps are. And the administrative burden, if it helps, I can provide in writing the summary that I've provided this morning to the committee, in terms of the administrative burden.
Okay, members. Thank you. Michelle, Catherine, thank you very much. Okay, members, moving on then. Agenda item 10, Work and Families Bill, departmental briefing. The bill papers are at page 392 and at page 566. And I just welcome Mr. Tom Evans and Dr. Alan Scott. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
It is.
Tom, Alan, over to yourselves after, I suppose, the input from the Employers Federation.
Yeah, Chairman, thanks for the invite. And probably as well we came after EAF. I mean, per usual, we had a prepared script, which was a sense of what might have come out of actually the presentation, but also the broader issues that were raised in response to your call for evidence. But there's quite a lot of issues here, and I'm going to abandon the script now and try and deal with the issues, if that's a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've tried to write them down. I'll just go through them fairly promptly, if that was it. I mean, the issue of, I think the first issue is that the current additional paternity leave and pay, the uptake is quite low. I think the introduction of the new arrangements is actually to probably, over a longer term, structurally to change the way in which working families care for their children, and at the same time you have a full and meaningful engagement in the workplace. And I know that Michelle did say it's welcome that where women are disengaged and traditionally disengaged from the workplace for a long length of time, which has impacts where they sit in terms of the opportunity structure. And I think that's the argument that the Minister would have, is this is about a more long-term structural systemic change in the way in which working families operate in terms of caring for their children. Much of the detail is about the concern around the detailed administrative arrangements, and I think in the submission that EAF provided and other employer bodies, and I'm conscious, Chair, that actually there was a very significant response from a range of employer bodies and from a range of bodies that would represent employees, and we're trying to balance, in terms of how we respond to that. But yes, much of the administrative arrangement will end up being framed in subordinate legislation and regulations, and those regulations, actually, the procedures that the legislation allows for, will actually then be, it'll be either the confirmatory or negative resolution procedure, and I would say that's the detailed working, and we will have to come to the committee with those there and try to explain to the committee. But what I would say is, I mean, we're very conscious of the issue of additional burdens. I mean, the system in place, what we are endeavouring to do is that the new arrangements is that they come in with this little upheaval to the systems that employers currently have. And I would say, in terms of the development of the regulations, we're going to keep them very close to the GB initiative. Obviously, the committee stage is hugely important to that, because once we go through the committee stage, we'll have a very good understanding of how the bill will look like and where that might mean in terms of how we can replicate regulations that are already developed in the rest of the UK. And also, again, I think the points that were made by Michelle is about the need for guidance, the need for online tools, the need for support mechanisms. All of that's we would concur with that, and that will be our objectives, to try and to put that in place as quickly as we can. In terms of just going down to it, the burdens in terms of securing, temporary replacements for when people are on different leave patterns, I suppose. Again, the guidance will be provided, but I think the reality of it is, when some people don't take it as a block, it means they're less time. It is an extended time away from the workplace, which means that it is more difficult to reintegrate parents back into the workplace, and obviously it means the placement year. And I suppose it's a fine balance about the benefits of early engagement. They'll be keeping in touch facilities and things like that there, against obviously the issue of getting short-term cover. Going on to the light touch, and Michelle,
I just stood there, Tom. Maybe the employer's right to say no.
There is always that default. I mean, when somebody says, "I want to take it in this pattern," and they can't agree to it, it then defaults to a single block of leave.
Yeah, so
and that will be it. And I suppose it's. I mean, there's a right to request, and that comes out of inflexible working. And again, it's a right to request, but you can't say, "I'm having this." The employer, for good business reasons, may be able to say, "Look, I'm sorry at this stage. The business might change." And I suppose, I mean, I think we're always, when we're introducing new arrangements, the polarised extreme scenarios have to be looked at to see how you could accommodate them. But many employers sit down with their employees, and some of these notification periods are set down in law. But the reality is, hopefully, good working relationships. Those, when somebody is either a woman finds herself pregnant, or a couple are deciding to adopt, they'll be having an early engagement with their employers, and hopefully to address those issues.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
In terms of actually the issue around knowing about the other employer, in terms of I suppose the validation that there wouldn't be any overcommitment or go beyond the statutory entitlements. There's never been intention from the department that employers have to go and almost police this. Will be. I mean, Alan is on a UK-wide advisory body looking at these issues, and HMRC are involved in that process. Now, HMRC are obviously always after people where there is deliberate fraud in place, but will be, I think, sympathetic to things where things there's a slight overclaiming by accident, and I think it will take a time. But I mean, there was never the intention, or there will not be the intention, that employers, when they get received a request for parental leave, and the partner of that person is in another employer, to go and start. They can do it, and if they so wish, but it's not something that we were expecting to happen. Talking again about the need for help and a dedicated helpline. I mean, we do fund the Labour Relations Agency, and they do provide a service, and we will be working. And I know a colleague is sitting in the gallery listening to this here and will report back. But that is hugely important. I do think that we may have some campaign-specific promotion of this here. And again, I think the idea of online tools and mechanisms which it makes it easier for employers. I mean, I think the EAF have made some very persuasive arguments that, you know, these are new arrangements. It'll take time to bed in, and I have to say, I suppose for the greater good of being able to share parental rights, there will be an issue about taking time for any new arrangements to bed in. In terms of again, I think we went back on the issue of the continuous block.
Tom, sorry, just go back then. No time to bed and timeline for the bill then.
Well, the timeline for the bill is obviously committee stage. You're planning to report by, I think, November time, and it will be our intention then, if depending on, it depends on the extent of any amendments and whatever, but our intention is that it would receive royal assent within early next year, with a view that arrangements would be in, that it would commence in April of 2015. I think that is it. Now, in terms of the regulations, which is the detail of it, until we know the shape of the bill post-committee stage, then we're able to start firming up. It's at that stage that we need to start engaging with the key stakeholders, start thinking about the kinds of guidance and online tools that will be developed. But if the bill isn't hugely different to what the UK arrangements are, we will be able to avail of the work that is already going. Alan is regularly on a teleconference arrangement, and so that, I mean, we're conscious of the need to build that process in. I suppose the issue then, I'm just, what happens when employers get it wrong? Errors, again, I think, as I said, the HMRC are looking at, I suppose, when either employers and employees are deliberately defrauding, and that is, and I think it's worth reiterating that any financial, the pay around it, employers get, I think it's 92%. 92%. And for small employers, they can be reimbursed up to 103% of the costs. There are already clawback facility arrangements in place for the current arrangements, and those would apply in the new arrangements if they come in. I think there was an issue raised about the potential discrimination. The department certainly doesn't want to in any way discourage good employers for providing enhanced contractual maternity pay arrangements, and wouldn't do that, and the way in which the system will be designed, won't. We want to avoid that, but we'll be happy to have discussions with employer bodies around those arrangements. And I mean, Chairman, those were the sort of issues that I've just gone down the list. If I've missed any, and I don't think I have. No, I think I've picked up in general terms on the issues that were raised.
It was the 8-week notice was also raised, Tom, in regard to notification.
Yeah, do you want to pick up on that?
Yes, I think the issue that was raised was that maybe 8 weeks wasn't seen as maybe sufficient time, and particularly the 2 weeks initial negotiation time between the employer and the employee. I think it's important to bear in mind that the 2 weeks starts with the written notification of the intention to request parental leave. But in good practice, good practice arrangements between employer and employee, we would envisage, and we'll be putting into the guidance, that employers and employees should be engaging before that, and that will enable, it means that 2 weeks isn't necessarily as restrictive as it would seem. And also, at the very outset of the leave, the employee will be required to give an indication of what they intend their pattern of leave to be. So right from the outset, an employer will be aware of what the intentions are, and will maybe hopefully start to engage with the employee about those intentions, so that good practice in the workplace, the 2 weeks is the statutory limit, but hopefully we would envisage good practice will allow better or more focused discussions over a longer period.
In regard to, I suppose, it's the sharing of systems or the sharing of information between the two employers, if there are two involved, what's the department, have you a thought or a mechanism in place for working, or is that solely going to be left to the individuals?
Part of the evidential requirements that an employee will have to submit would be around the leave that the other person is intending to take or has taken. Now, the employer doesn't have to check up on that with the other employer. They can do if they want to do that. But it is not really, as Tom says, we don't envisage a policing role for employers. HMRC is really the body that would be looking after that side of things, and if they really feel that there's an instance of fraud or the system is being abused, they will look into that. But as Tom has also indicated, it is their intention to take a risk-based approach to it. So if it's something that is genuine mistake that has been made, it'll be a light touch approach to that.
It's very much more on a good faith basis at this stage that we would see it.
And under regulations, will there be any penalties stipulated, or?
The penalties, again, under the existing systems, there are penalties for fraudulent activity, and those are taken up through HMRC, and the arrangements would be the same as they are under the current arrangements for example, the existing system of additional paternity leave and pay.
Okay, Pat.
Yeah. Good morning, you're very welcome. Good afternoon. There was a number of areas that the employer organisation referenced. You haven't went into them all, but I think it's important that you go through Hansard and provide the members with any written responses, and because the areas around maternity leave and the potential for sex discrimination claims about guidance there, I think we need to tie that down some way. Tracking pay between employers has to be tied down. Guidance on that as well. The Chair has mentioned some of them. The time once the legislation was on, there's, in terms of awareness and education, a lead-on time as well. I think could we address that at some stage as we're going through it? I think you have confirmed you'd be keen to look at an online toolkit and a helpline. I'd be keen to hear how that goes. But it's also important, as members are raising issues, that you're tweaking the regulations coming forward to prevent amendments coming from members. I have consistently raised here and in the chamber in relation to kinship carers, and it does surprise me and shock me that they're not referenced, given the level of times and the Minister's acceptance in the debate in the chamber of the need for them to be referenced. Because there is a case, Chair, for example, knowing the relevance in kinship carers have across Northern Ireland now, that if a mother or a granny receives a child as a result of someone being ill or a death or something else, there's an immediate concern of what is available to them in terms of employment rights. So I think we have to tie that down in terms of ensuring that kinship carers are referenced within this article, within the regulations, to enable them to have peace of mind and comfort as well. Is there any reason why it wasn't referenced?
And you have raised it, and the issue of it's quite a difficult issue because, this initiative was about sharing of parental entitlements, and I understand the point you made. Kinship carers, which is the definition, where there's formal and informal arrangements, and the actual policy of it, probably the lead is in probably DHS PS, with obviously on the benefit side, the Department of Social Development. And you know, I'm happy that we write back the point you make about we will be looking at the Hansard and we will give a written response to each of the issues raised, because the points are helpful for us as a reference point as we move forward, and we're happy to. I mean, it's not that the department is not wanting to do something. It's just difficult to know how we can take this forward. I mean, it hasn't been. You've raised it, and I know, but it's not something that was raised in the GB process. And as I say, we would have to consult with other departments on this issue, but we'll write on that basis.
Unless, could I suggest then to try and progress a little bit? There is a formal organisation, Kinship Care Northern Ireland. Could I suggest you meet with them? And I'll go along with them to a meeting, just a brief meeting, just to go through the rationale and the reasons for it. They might have a higher profile in Northern Ireland than they have in GB, and certainly there's no reason why we can't do it. Thanks.
All right, Pat, thanks. Members, anybody else? Not.
Yes, Chair. Can I just thanks so much for the presentation. I think it was the ICTU had said that there were something like 30,000 women who were pregnant had lost their jobs. I'm not quite sure what date it was. What would the situation be in Northern Ireland at the moment, Tom, and as a result of this new legislation, would that actually help a situation?
Well, I don't think the change will change. I mean, women shouldn't lose their jobs, and there are redress facilities, and that's what employment reveals. If an employer has terminated somebody's employment because they're pregnant, that shouldn't happen. And I mean, I'm not sure whether there are any figures for the of tribunals hearing those, but this doesn't change that. Women's rights are already established.
Yeah.
And don't change with that. They're not diminished by that.
I think it was the Equality Commission that quoted from that.
Yeah.
Was that their research?
But I mean, this wouldn't diminish. I mean, those rights are in place, and employers shouldn't be discriminated because of that they find themselves pregnant.
Yes, and I think
I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I'm saying it shouldn't, and there are legal redress mechanisms to deal with that.
And in terms of European directive, how does that fit in with that? In terms of European legislation?
In terms of there's nothing specific in European legislation requiring the sharing of parental leave. There are requirements around maternity, and there are requirements around unpaid parental leave, but this is going in advance of actually what's required under European law.
We actually transposed the parental leave directive some time ago, and we came to the committee, and the reality was that Northern Ireland and the UK as a whole were already far outliving the minimum requirements of that directive. That may not have been the case in other member countries.
Right, okay. Okay, thanks so much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks so much. Members, no. Tom, Alan, thank you very much again. We'll see you before this. We're finishing this and get to the team room. Okay, members, raised earlier on, any other business? Members, if not, thank you very much. Date, time and place of next meeting will remind you 9 a.m. Wednesday the 17th of September, room 29, Parliament Buildings. Thank you.
Assembly.